And we're now officially live for another episode of Lore Ramblings. Hey there, everyone. This is the Scum crew. I'm Adam.
Greg.
And I'm Techpriest, and I'm about to get lit.
Oh yeah, it's going to be great. So today we're actually going to cover a very, very good book. At least I'm thinking it's going to be good because, it's Edo Period Hunter. Come on, don't you want to fight random weird yokai?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people seemed interested in this, and I'm kind of interested.
Yeah, so let's begin. Oh, that's weird. It doesn't have a story before then. Let's continue. Enenra rubber. The Enenra rubber is a fully enclosed suit of rubber and PVC, worn by fetishists and imbued with breath-stealing power of the black. What? Oh, wait a minute. Sorry, guys, that's the wrong book. That's Black Tokyo. We promised to never cover that again.
Wait. What are you talking about? What are you talking about? I just been hearing static on my end.
Sorry about that. That was a bit of an accident there. Anyway, Fallen Blossoms.
So wait, you're reading Black Tokyo on your own time?
No.
Are you sure about that?
I think my computer might be, because the disturbing part is the bookmarks that were open when we did it like 2 years ago were still opened and memorized by my computer.
Oh, fuck.
So my computer is self-aware, and it reads Black Tokyo on its own time.
It horny.
So, yeah, Fallen Blossoms. Essentially, this deals with Edo period Japan during the midst of the Tokugawa shogunate.
Fallen blossoms do not return to their branches. That's where the name of this chapter comes from.
So, here's the thing. There's about 200 years to deal with when you're talking about Edo period Japan.
Yeah, it's a relatively long period, and you really can't do it in 220 pages, as they mention here.
I mean, admittedly, it's a time of relative peace after the Sengoku Jidai, but there were a lot of events that occurred, in particular whenever they tried to interact with either the kingdoms outside of Japan, or when the West slowly but surely oozed their way in.
But this isn't really about that. This is more about the internalities of Japan at this moment.
Which was quite developed. A lot of cultural and societal developments were occurring during this time.
Yeah, this is kind of when you're looking at classical media. This is just after like the Sengoku Jidai, which is the age of the country at war.
That's the stuff with Oda Nobunaga for those anime
which is
fans
which is essentially basically the best equivalent is the Romance of the Three Kingdoms Japan edition, but set when there's gunpowder.
Do you mind if I do the too long didn't read version?
Oh, sure. It's pretty simple.
Yeah.
Country breaks apart between military dictatorship and emperor. No one decides. Warlord period. One warlord stands out above them all. Does a lot of good conquering. Does a lot of good vassal management alliances. Gets yeeted by one of said vassals. Breaks apart. One of his vassals unites them again. Decides to unite them all by committing war crimes in Korea. Doesn't work out. Dies. Country breaks apart. Gets united by another one of those former Oda vassals. Unites the country for reals this time. Peaceful things and with only a slight bit of genocide against the Christians.
Also shuts down all ports.
Also realizes that these Jesuits are really causing a lot of problems. Let's restrict them.
Commits genocide against Christians.
Don't worry, he was an equal opportunist. He also murdered a lot of devoted Buddhist monks too.
Oh yeah.
So yeah, that's kind of the opening, and then from there a lot of societal, economic, and just not only rebuilding but an advancement of things.
200 years of relative peace, isolation, and slow disillusion and destruction of the relevance of the warrior class.
Also stagnation, just technologically, since they're not interacting with the rest of the world.
It's actually weird because they actually are interacting with the rest of the world. There's an entire branch called
very limited level. Yeah.
Yes, but it's very limited, and it's essentially like more of a curiosity thing than anything else for a lot of the people that are involved with it. It's like they, for example, knew what a microscope was. They had examples of a microscope. They had writings about a microscope. It's just that nobody cared.
Yep, good old Rangaku, as you're trying to call it.
Yeah, they kept them to a couple of ports.
A whole new style of theater was designed around this time. A massive refinement on the Japanese diet occurred during this period. In fact, actually, the original version of sushi evolves into its more modern form during this time.
Also, the population grew significantly, mostly due to the lack of wars, lack of famines caused by war. Just lack of war.
The lack of war did help. Trade routes were heavily established within Japan, which meant that a lot of economic flow went on. And which is how the entirely new art styles were designed. In particular, trading cards were very popular.
Yeah, the Japanese
gaming in general.
Yeah. The language itself also kind of underwent a bit of a change as well.
Yeah, equivalent of shifting from Middle to Modern Japanese, yeah.
Yes. Though there were still quite a few regional dialects and all of that, though that would kind of die down in the later period as everything got standardized after the Industrial Revolution. But there's still a lot of regional differences, which includes, of course, one of the biggest discussions of this, the yokai.
Yep.
Japan's always been incredibly superstitious.
Not only that, but there's a lot of very distinct folklore that's very isolated from each other, yet still might share the same theme again and again. It's kind of interesting that way.
So yeah, the basic introduction goes into this final unified Japan again.
Mm-hmm.
And how that changes, because hunters were a thing, because, hey, in the Chronicles of Darkness, the things that go bump in the night are real, to some degree. Mm-hmm. And that includes yokai.
Also, do you think with remember, this was a country that had a full-on government division of spellcasters meant to ward away spirits.
Oh yeah, I forgot they had that.
There's actually also, for that matter, the shogun would occasionally issue proclamations that no yokai were allowed in an area. And of course, the yokai would oblige because he is the shogun.
And that's what the hunter's duties are, is to enforce the will of the shogun.
To some degree. But
also
not really.
Independent, because, again, hunters work different.
As I like the way they put it. The hunters of Tokugawa wear as many skins as their prey. There are men and women, old and young, samurai and hinin. Those who fight patrol the forests and nightmare-haunted alleyways. Those who can't chase secrets across the libraries and grimoires.
Basically, the hunters know that the myths are real. They know that what's going on, and they know that these things must die for the country to thrive. Now, that said, it's kind of they even go into a linguistic discussion of how we get the term Japan at all, which is fun. That's a fun linguistic discussion that we're not going to cover because it would take way too long. But basically, the Chinese sounds are a little bit different between Nihon and Nippon, which then got somehow to Japan from, I think, the Dutch.
Because of course it's the Dutch.
It's either the Dutch or the Portuguese. Then it was anglicized again. So it's a mess. But yes, the fact of the matter is that the hunters of this era are kind of in a weird position. In that it's very similar to the modern era in how they often operate and how they're kind of treated by society.
The country is at peace. I mean, this is not an era of chaos. This is an era of peace. So
yes.
Unlike, say, back in the previous one where we could talk about witch hunter groups walking around being, if, a scary sight wouldn't be unknown. A bunch of armed men walking around with weird superstitions, that probably get the authorities called on them because what the hell are all these Ronin doing?
Yeah, that's a big problem.
Also, Japan at this time has outlawed the holding of swords to anyone that is not a samurai. So if you're a fucking peasant, good luck fighting back against the monster.
Well, not only that, but because they're not in a wartime period, their exploits are usually not recorded. Or if they're recorded, they're seen as madmen. Or like criminals or bandits that are then put down by the local daimyo or by the actual, governmental soldiers.
Or they're just not recorded. It's like someone went missing in this time period and no one gives a shit.
Yeah, no one gives a shit because they weren't noted. It was just some random person who serves tea.
And not only that, this is a weird period in Japanese history because of the transition from this era of the country at war into an era of peace.
Which is
the Tokugawa shogunate is a time of growth and rebirth and a foundation of much of what we come to see as traditional Japanese culture. The concept of Bushido as a philosophy is expanded upon and eventually perverted later on by the Japanese government during the post-industrial revolution, but there's a lot of other discussion.
More by the military than the government, but yeah.
Not relevant.
Well, they were basically one and the same after a certain point.
That's the thing. They both were the same.
Oh, also, don't forget, this time, the social status of everyone was reinforced, as highlighted by the thing below, Hinin, or essentially the untouchable, the Japanese untouchables.
Yes, these were the people that their jobs were often butchers, entertainers, cleaners, morticians, essentially unclean jobs, such as being prostitutes and things like that.
Oh, and something as simple as a tanner, because Buddhism has this weird thing about handling dead things.
Yes,
yeah,
which
that's
is
why
integrated.
And butchers also are included.
Yes, which is also to a degree why fishermen are sort of in a weird spot, because they do have to clean fish.
They need them a lot.
They're not unperson compared
to
They're close. They're closer than the most. So like if you see humble person and it's a fisherman, that's because it's a bit of a weird philosophical spot. But
and here's a fun little order thing, because people may not know, but merchants are like right above non-people, because merchants were horribly shat on.
They were considered to bring nothing of value to society,
which is a transplant from China, actually.
Yes,
which is also a transplant from Buddhism, which is blah 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 blah.
Yep.
Yeah, you gotta love. It's also the funny thing about that is, and funny enough, with one of the hunter groups, one of them is actually the merchant class, which figured out things about the supernatural.
They also carry on into the modern, actually, as well. They how do I put it? The group will cover this is their origin and why Tokyo is such a weird place in the world of darkness in the modern. Because imagine a place where the hunters kind of won.
To where the supernaturals work under them.
So some moods also include just there's elements of violence and zealotry.
Yes, this is This is the thing where the motivation is hunger in many ways, because the fact of the matter is that this is a time of everything is kind of let loose. The tension from a country at war is gone, and there's nothing left but to consume the glory and the spoils, whatever that is.
Also, you've got an entire warrior class with no wars to fight.
That's the biggest reason that hunger's a problem in this setting, because Ashigaru that were trained to fight now have to figure out what they're doing when they go home. Samurai who have had long rivalries with other clans, samurai clans who had rivalries with other clans, they're now forced to they can't do the blood feuding no more.
Yeah, they are now turned into bureaucrats.
And that's one of the funniest things. Transition. It's one of the funniest things. If you ever wondered why Japanese Army and Navy had such a nasty rivalry, it has ties to Tokugawa. Because the two clans that form the nucleus of both the Imperial Army and Imperial Navy, or just the state's Army and Navy, hated each other. They fought regularly during the Sengoku Jidai, and even before then. And that bled into their services.
All they can do is seething pulp. And now all they can do is seethe and cope.
And that's why the Imperial Japanese Army built 2 aircraft carriers. I'm not kidding.
Yeah. Don't forget the fact that they're...
Also, the Japanese Navy tried to build their own army.
They did, yeah. There was also the fact that they refused to use the same plane for anything ever.
Oh, yeah. To give you an idea, Japan needed to make 2 models of different types of plane each time.
Anyway, I actually want to read some of this stuff because I actually like some of the artsy things here because I think it fits.
Yes.
Such volcanic hunger isn't without its pleasures. Fulfillment awaits at the opposite end of the appetite. Carnal and rich as a mouthful of warm stew. The victorious hunter will have access to a smorgasbord of rewards, both tangible and not. Riches, the shogun's favor, the merchant's jealous worship, and the awe of their peers. Fallen Blossoms is much about the joy of the kill as it is the hunt itself.
Because, again, this is a time of superstition, so if you said that you went out and killed an actual Oni, and you could kind of prove it, yeah, you're going to get fucking rewarded for killing an Oni.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. You're going to be treated, if not, like, as a gigantic hero, definitely as a local folk hero.
Mm-hmm. But this amount of wanting can be dangerous, too. What happens when someone is kept from the object of their lust? What happens when it is submitted instead to someone of a higher ranking, of noble birth? Will the victim grit his teeth and tolerate this affront, or will he seethe and plot revenge? Even the tautest bonds of camaraderie will fray.
This I actually like because it has ties to the concept of how yokai even form in the first place. Because a lot of yokai are vengeful, are basically those whose spirits
grudges
either have grudges or way too much obsession with a thing.
Yes.
Sometimes
not
always,
even formed
from the
but
dead.
Especially with the undead.
Sometimes they're not even formed from the dead. They can form while alive, just from someone's sheer seething.
Or just sometimes just due to how many people use them. My favorite of the yokai are they're called like the 99-year objects. I forget the full name in Japanese.
Tsukigami, I think.
Those are among my favorites because there's like a variety of types. And it's all just either from long periods of neglect or just long periods of use. And they gain a life of their own.
It's usually long periods of use. The general idea is that the longer something is in use and around, is that the more of a spirit it develops. Which, if you've ever been around,
that's why a sword that is used won't have a soul, but a sword that was just crafted to be ceremonial probably doesn't.
Yeah, which is also why, like, if you've been with anyone that's worked with machines for a long time or weapons or anything like that, you can definitely tell that they treat different things differently, especially ones that have been used more, and often like ascribe them personalities almost. It's sort of just that sort of natural human tendency to do that, taken to, well, the way that the Japanese do it, which is that they assign an actual spirit to it and a name and all that and classify it and then write about all the different kinds of it is. Yokai are a fascinating topic, which there is a group there's a podcast called Mythological. I recommend. They did a long episode on yokai, which I do recommend if you're ever planning on running this setting, to at least watch.
Mind you, I'm more of a fan of Otto Kamara, one of the 3 great monsters of Japan. He was literally a guy who was so seething mad, he turned into an Oni while alive. He was that much of an mad asshole.
Imagine being so angry you became a monster.
While alive. Not like your spirit, like he turned into a monster. Also, hey, shout out to one of the other 3 great monsters, Tamamo, whose spirit stone holding them in prison recently broke.
Yeah,
have fun.
We've got a very horny fox with a bunch of anime pictures of her running around now.
Reminder that she killed her last husband almost.
Yeah. Well, I mean, death by snoo is a hell of a way to go.
I don't think it was really that. Also, their battle scarred the earth.
I think one of my favorites still goes to the sea bombs or the omibozu.
Mm-hmm. Anyway,
the one where you can trick with just by putting holes in a bucket. Although sometimes they'll just punch you by like just using their hands.
Yeah. Another great example of this is like the Kappa. The Kappa is a very common yokai with a bunch of different regional variations.
Which I think they'll actually stat in here because of that. But anyway, how did we get here?
How do we get here?
We kind of explain we kind of already explained.
There was the Battle of Sekigahara, which is basically the last battle of the Sengoku Judai, where Tokugawa defeats his main rivals.
Well, the last of his rivals, because by this point, Oda killed off most of those that had a strong enough ability to separate.
Mm-hmm. And then the monkey got a bunch of them killed in committing war crimes against the Koreans.
Well, and
if you're wondering why I'm calling it war crimes, it's only a conquest if you win.
Yeah. He also screwed up so bad that he basically took a surefire situation in his home country and fucking pissed it away by doing that. So, yeah, Tokugawa basically, he had maybe a few guys left and a few holdovers to deal with. So that's why Sekigahara was basically the last gasp. And from that point, it big piece, and this is where you're in.
Mm-hmm.
Your characters here are hunters on a vigil. It can be for a variety of reasons. Maybe just local children are disappearing and you try to have to figure out what the hell's going on. Or there's just something in you driving you. Like, you know that it's some horrible old mountain hag that's doing it. And most people are afraid, but something in you guides you to take out that bitch.
Also, they do this little thing about the daimyo to explain what the fuck that even is.
Yeah,
because not everyone's familiar, and this is something I'm already liking about the book. It's making sure
it's explaining what these terms actually mean, and I also want to note that it also explains what
classified them. Because the thing is, people know that daimyo, like even I didn't know this, but daimyo were traditionally lower level lords, the equivalent of a feudal lord in Europe, or like maybe a baron. But in this one, they classify specifically how you become a daimyo. They're formalized depending on how much rice they produced under their purview. It had to be 50,000 minimum for you to be declared a daimyo. So you can actually have a fairly large farm, just a fairly wealthy landholder, but you're not a daimyo.
You're not a daimyo. You might owe your fealty to a daimyo. You might be samurai, but you're not a daimyo.
Daimyo specifically is, here's how much food you have to produce. And this is because Tokugawa, because he came out of about 100 years of war at this point, he went, hey, let's make it so that you get nobility from food production. So we don't deal with famines again. Those weren't fun.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of
also promoted competition in a way that didn't result in people getting chopped in the head with a sword,
which helped. In fact, actually, there were 3. They even go into more details about the different classifications. Shinpan, which are the daimyo related to Tokugawa themselves. Fudai, which were those who allied with him. And Tozuma, which those were ones he classified that actually did not side with the winning side.
But that can mean either. That either means they were neutral and they didn't join, or they were big enough enemies that they couldn't be completely dismantled.
Or alternatively, they rivaled Tokugawa but served the more winning sides before him. That was also somewhat common. I was loyal to Oda, but not you.
Mm-hmm.
Because that's the thing, when he died, everyone had rivals. But yeah, the Veil of Tonight. So, Nippon is united, and right now, Iemitsu is holding power. That's Tokugawa Ieyasu's grandson.
The first actual leader of the Tokugawa after Ieyasu.
Yeah. And the very first thing he did when he became shogun was kick all the Europeans out. And he also locked down his nation super hard.
He didn't actually kick out all of the Europeans. There's some exceptions, and
some of them he murdered horribly.
Some of them he did. Others he was happy to have around. For example, there was a Englishman that shipwrecked that he kept around because he made the Portuguese mad. There were a few others that just ended up arriving from shipwrecks or as not necessarily missionaries, because he had a weird relationship with missionaries in that he kept them around, but that was more to keep an eye on them so they couldn't actually go out and preach.
Because that was a problem that they
This is not the era.
Time to time.
This is not the era where anyone preaching the word of God who set a single foot on Japanese soil would be beheaded.
It's not quite that time yet.
That was later, or was that earlier?
Later.
A mixture of both, but primarily later.
Yes.
Let's be honest. Some people I remember with monarchies is that it sometimes just fucking depends on what the ruler thinks.
I mean, there was one Tokugawa shogun who had he's I think known as the dog shogun because he made a bunch of laws regarding dogs and how much he liked them. Kind of weird.
I don't know. Is that as weird or weirder than the reason shoguns even came to being in the first place?
Who knows? Anyway.
I actually do know. If you're wondering why, what happened was the Japanese emperors used to rule originally, but there was a string of them that became so decadent and obsessed primarily with art. This was during the Nara
period,
and poetry, that their nation effectively fragmented, and the shogun system was installed. I believe it was during the Genpei War.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, essentially when the Normans were conquering England, the Japanese were fracturing.
Mainly because the emperors are too busy, like, obsessing over poetry and hiring playwrights and watching artists paint to run their country.
There's also a lot of
that's where we got the tale of the Genji from.
Yes, that was actually an earlier novel, I think.
No, Tale of Genji by Lady Murasaki, written in 1016, the very first modern form of novel that we've ever seen.
Yeah, I think that is during, the first shogunate? I could be wrong on that.
Nope, slightly before then. This was during the end of the imperial rule of the time. I think it was about 100 years before then.
But anyway, as we're getting into, speaking of things like advancements, now instead of great art, we're moving into the middle class, the merchants and the artisans.
Yeah, because now that things are becoming prosperous, everyone was able to actually afford things that they couldn't during wartime.
Yeah.
Also, production could move away from making spears and bows and arrows
and
into
guns.
doing things like
the Japanese had a pretty cool gun industry.
Oh my god, you would not believe the Japanese were actually the first to come up with the idea of putting a sight on a gun.
Then they forgot all about it, thanks to thanks to Tokugawa.
No, they actually kept making matchlock guns up into the 1800s.
There were some being used in the Civil War, but anyway.
They were actually considered cursed. Quite. Yeah, it's cursed, but it's like, well, it
worked.
They didn't ever have a need to adopt the flintlock or the percussion cap until the Meiji kind of Civil War.
No, it wasn't until Admiral Perry strolled up with his fucking ship saying,
"Open the ports,
motherfuckers, open your port." Or what? It shoots giant fucking modernized Napoleonic period cannonball into fortress wall, instantly smashing it. That.
Hold on, History of Japan, Perry video. There's gonna be a clip for that.
Matthew Perry, yeah. I know that.
Yep. As you do that, let me take the time to adjust the stream health to see how it's doing. Good. I am remembering to actually put everyone's audio at the right levels. I was a little worried for some reason that I might have accidentally had everything muted.
We should move to customs and culture.
No, we need to look at Admiral Perry.
Open the borders.
Open the borders now. I must show this beautiful.
Hold on.
Baby boy.
I just need to find History of Japan.
Okay, since he's gonna take too long, customs and culture.
Yeah, just keep moving. Here we go.
Customs and essentially, this is the era where Kyoto is officially the capital with the emperor. It's not really the capital because the emperor is a fucking figurehead, so power goes to where the shogun is. In this case, Edo. Edo at this point in time is it barely has like 60,000 people. However, within a few hundred years, it's going to have 1 million people.
For those wondering, Edo becomes the term eventually for Tokyo. It was renamed that because it became the eastern capital.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, because there was Kyoto and Tokyo.
Also,
thank you, Starask, for determining that it sounds fine. I was a little worried.
Here is, by the way, Adam, here is the meme from the one video everyone's seen.
Yeah, let's show off this video. It'll be fine.
It's like a 11-second clip. We'll be fine.
Let me just, it'll take a little bit because I am what you call in the professional business incompetent.
I was just gonna say, is unlike Constantinople being reborn, it didn't require the forced movement of people at gunpoint to repopulate the city.
Check it out. Oh, sorry.
It's with knock knock. It's the United States with huge boats with guns, gunboats. Open the country. Stop having it be closed," said the United States.
I love that guy's videos. Bill Wirtz, I believe, is his name.
Yes, it is. It's the Bill Wirtz.
Oh, okay.
Nope. Almost had another video play. Sorry, guys. I autoplay like
knock knock. It's the United States.
Gunboats. Boats with guns. Gunboats. Open the country. Stop having it be closed.
You will see a little bit of Bill Wirtz's "How did this happen?" for a second, but anyway, Neo-Confucianism. Because the Tokugawas emphasized heavily, well, Neo-Confucianism. Which, since Japan often either aped or was inspired by Chinese trade, their notions were blended with their local native Shinto religion, and also blended in with Buddhist beliefs.
They basically stole their entire language writing system off from China. It is literally they just took the entire thing and were like, well, we could develop our own unique script and go through the effort of all that, and they sort of did, but but
you see, we have Big Brother China over there.
Or we could just take everything from China and call it good.
They had 7 different scripts. There was the simplified one designed to teach children, the one that was designed to import over Western words, the one that was actually primarily supposed to be used only by women, and I think there was another one that was used by the Hinin, the ones that were not allowed to, have relevance.
Also, one funny note, because of the Japanese blatant, let's just call it admiration for China, the Chinese used to call Japan Wa, which which record translates to the dwarf, the distant dwarf and submissive. So when they
literally were calling the Chinese manlets.
Oh, the Japanese.
They were calling the Japanese. No, the Japanese were calling the Chinese were calling the Japanese the little dwarf people.
Eastern dwarf.
Oh, I forgot about that. Yeah. Oh man, that's even funnier, honestly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they never had a high opinion of them.
Imagine the Chinese calling you manlets. Just.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But because of Tokugawa's efforts in pushing it, he tried to remove the strong religious elements, mainly because his grandpappy had to kill the Iko-Iki.
Oh boy.
Which were radical Buddhist monks.
Sort of a weird pseudo-communist Buddhist religious cult.
Based
that
on
also practiced radical equality and everything. They're weird
versions of Jodo Shinshu, which is a specific type of Japanese Buddhism.
All in all, he realized that giving religious leaders any real power was a mistake.
So he emphasizes Confucian, everything can be taught and understood within human reason.
Mm-hmm. Which includes the general Shinto ritual, which is why, for example, if you're wondering why an anime, why they have no idea what a nun is, kind of how a nun works, is because of this to a degree.
Anyway, Neo-Confucianism does actually mesh with Bushido in a way, because they go over what exactly it means to be Bushido in this case.
Yeah, the general tenets from Edo Japan of being that, but yeah.
Well, Bushido was a concept that existed among the samurai class since their inception, which was during the Genpei War. The first samurai came about during the Genpei War.
But this is what Bushido means. And like any chivalric code, because that's essentially what Bushido really is. It's the chivalric code of Japan, that in the most generalized
it's idea. How you should act. It's not how people usually acted, but it's how you should act, and therefore
particularly particularly this wasn't how the merchants were supposed. This was specifically how the samurai class was supposed to act.
Yes,
because now they needed to figure out what to do since they're not in war all the time anymore.
Mm-hmm. Anyway, this is what it means to be samurai at this time period, as it mentions. You are to live and die with honor and loyalty. You should be detached, calm, polite, hold justice in your heart and practice martial arts.
What's that? Force my enlisted men to buy all copies of my horrible poetry and beat them with rods? That's an actual thing Japanese officers did during World War II and won.
Yes.
Be devoted, whether this means to the shogun, to your local lord, or to the emperor. Up to you.
You are not. You're not your own master.
You are subordinate. You are a subordinate. Own it. Recognize that your country is a holy place. Its people are holy, and above all, the emperor is holy. And anyone not from here is a dirty barbarian.
Yeah.
They're not people, so you can treat them like death.
Action is essential and should be performed without hesitation, regardless of its potential success or failure.
This is why
basically they say don't be a pussy is basically one of the tenets of being a samurai.
Don't think, even if this has a high chance of failure, it literally says, even if this has a very good chance of you dying horribly and failing, honor dictates you must.
This is why Pearl Harbor and Tsushima and the Great Turkey Shoot happened.
If samurai cannot uphold their role, kill yourself.
Now, that being said, that part of it kind of declined later on in the Edo period.
Mainly
anyway,
because
a good death.
The thing is, seppuku was sometimes forced.
Yeah, it was. Or seppuku was done in place of being killed.
Or, in the most extreme cases, it was considered basically the way that a very, very loyal retainer could go tell their boss in the ultimate way that they are being an absolute fag and they should stop.
There's been cases where they would do that.
Yes.
My favorite was when Oda Nobunaga's his teacher, he got really upset that Oda Nobunaga acted like a brat during his father's funeral, so much so that he wrote like a slam poetry thing and then offed himself. And then
yes, it was basically the ultimate way of shaming your boss, because the implication was that an honorable samurai could not live in under your service. Mm-hmm. That was part of it. The other part of it is to show that you are so devoted to the ideals of your class.
Also, in a very, I'm going to be perfectly honest, I think terrible notion for the final thing, a samurai should embrace all temporal rewards and values. Since your role is to fight and kill, you will have no reward in the afterlife. So be as hedonistic as you want.
Why do you think the Japanese officers demanded everyone buy their books?
Oh, speaking of hedonism, Waka
You're cutting out. Anyway, Wakushudo.
Among samurai and daimyo, where the nobles would take young male lovers.
Greg, you cut out.
Greg, you cut out occasionally. Anyway, this is basically the equivalent of, in Greece, how there were like the Spartans would molest kids. This is that.
This is classic Greek pederasty. No, it's Greek pederasty.
I mean, the Greeks started younger, so
yeah, no. I actually mean it in the term of what it meant back then, where it's the idea of an older man teaching a young man the ropes.
Yeah.
Yes, that's not as horrible.
It's not as molesty.
It still is.
It still has a horrible it's still a horrible power imbalance. Not that.
Well,
it is.
Not
yes,
only
but
that,
it's not the Greek
it's
level.
still pedophilia, and you still should be beaten to death by South American peasants, 13 to 18. Kill yourself.
At this period, it's not this. Okay.
People justify that by using nobility, but nobles were not normal.
No. I mean, what I mean by this is that at this period, the custom was basically just like. Yeah,
they even mentioned it. Unlike in other cultures that promoted pederasty, they even call it that, the young man is expected to be intimate in the relationship. They suggested that these relationships typically went between the ages of 13 and 18. While historically accurate, Shudo is a complex issue for some people. It may come up in a chronicle, so please discuss boundaries, please.
Or just don't.
Just don't,
exactly.
Discuss. Sorry,
hey, you guys
I think
want
I misread
this?
that as initiator, not intimate. I think I misread that. I might have had a little too much brandy already. Anyway,
still, it's not as horrible as the Greeks, which had it way younger, but that still doesn't make it good.
No, what I meant by this period, the emphasis on a lot of this had just died away. It was basically gone.
Yeah. This is if you're a samurai holding these beliefs in the game, if you're playing in this era, you'd be seen as a relic.
You're in the minority by far,
and probably considered dangerous, considering you legitimately believe you need to die in battle somehow.
Somewhat, but more that the idea is that you have to have a good death. Which means that you have to die in service somehow, which is what that became essentially.
Mm-hmm. And as it moved, and at this point, it moves from the way of battle to Shonindo, the way of the town person.
Yeah, basically that if you're a samurai and if you didn't serve your lord well, then yeah, like your objective should be to serve your lord. That's half the point of Bushido. No matter what you're supposed to do, you're supposed to serve the purpose of the country, of the emperor, and of your daimyo.
But yeah, Shonindo is actually, as it's literally described, it's essentially the peasantry trying to create their own version of Bushido that they can work with.
Yeah.
Because they can't live lives of battle, so instead they focus on developing wealth and doing good for the emperor and the state by being productive little peasants.
Now the thing is, because they're peasants and fairly not wealthy compared to the samurai, because their whole thing was hedonism, and on top of that, since they had things to do like work, Shonindo did not actually get documented anywhere near as well as Bushido.
Well, also, yeah, the peasants didn't read or write as much.
Yeah,
there's that too, but a lot of it is also you have a functioning job. They don't. They have to figure out what to do when you're not murdering.
Yeah, it's important to note that Japan, even in this era, is actually a very literate culture. There are a lot of more people than you would expect during this period who can at least read.
Which is but surprising and hilarious when you look into the 20th century where it's the opposite.
Yeah, but there is a very big difference between being able to read and write and having the time, necessity, or want to do so, which the average peasant doesn't. Because you know what all those samurai that aren't doing? They're not working, so they have a lot of time to read and write and write philosophy. The peasants don't.
Even in the 20th century, when you consider, like, when you compare, say, Japan to a lot of neighboring countries, Russia especially, the amount of literacy among the population was surprisingly high during their industrialization. I didn't say surprisingly high is kind of what I get at. Like,
if you compare to China.
I think it was like one out of 4 could read in Japan, or was it 1 out of 3?
I think it was 1 in 3, which was for the era
for Russia,
pretty good
compared to Russia, which it was. I think it was 1 out of 5.
10.
1 out of 5 to 1 out of 10, depending on where you were in the country. And in China, it was 1 out of 4.
Yeah, so the literacy rate was rather high, partially because the Japanese, like a lot of Eastern cultures, were very meticulous with record keeping.
By the way, fun fact, during this time, the Deep South had a literacy of about 1 out of 8, if I remember. Unless it was the African American community, in which case it was the opposite, where it was 7 out of 8 that could read.
And
mainly to bypass those unfair voting laws.
Yeah.
Since we already went over Bushido, because it kind of goes over it again, we move on to the next page and exactly what isolationism actually means.
Yep.
Yeah.
Sakoku.
It's not total isolation from the world. People mistake this.
There are 5 ports that you are allowed to visit.
Yes. On top of that, people who were shipwrecked or people who, for example, just accidentally landed, generally what you would be told is you would have someone come over and say, you just need to sail to this port now and don't come back.
Yeah. Even then, even doing some of the worst things, it was you weren't shot out of the water. They just wouldn't let foreigners on soil. So if you needed to just hide from a storm, they might allow that if
they'll let you into. They might give you food. They might give you like the occasional bit of like, okay, like we'll trade a little bit, but you got to go. You just need to go.
Also, the only people allowed in after 1639 were the Dutch, specifically through the Dutch East India Company, and Chinese.
Yes, because the Dutch was primarily a way to control religious growth, because
also the Dutch were far less pushy.
The Dutch didn't actually send any missionaries, which was one of the interesting things. The Dutch didn't do that because they didn't want to.
Yeah.
The Portuguese, on the other hand,
you gotta love Iberian Catholic fervor.
And meanwhile, the Dutch are just like, we just want money.
Yeah.
just give us your money. We don't care.
There's that religious element of the unfamiliar man with the Catholic faith probably thinking, oh yeah, this is a secret way to overthrow for either their weird religious head over there or for the Portuguese themselves.
By the way, have you ever heard of Isakuri? Okay, so Catholicism in Japan gets kind of weird because there's a small sect sort of that believes that Jesus
Oh,
didn't
you're talking about that one where it's not even a small sect. It's cranks that basically went, oh yeah, Jesus didn't ascend up to heaven. He went to die in Japan.
Yes, it's essentially a group of secret Christians that kind of got morphed into the local belief system, and it's a fun story where it's like Jesus had like a half brother in Japan that then swapped places with him on the cross, so then Jesus became like I think it was like a avocado farmer or some shit.
Anyway, they after with isolation, they move into some of the districts of Japan, the highways and the Sakin Kotai, which essentially, since Japan is a united country again, mostly united, they could start doing things like developing the roads.
Yeah, and this leads to more yokai also, because that's the nature of yokai. They travel where people do.
Crystal Dragon Jesus. Yeah, Coyote. Japanese Mormons. That's also accurate. I was going to actually explain Senkin Kotai because they do explain it. Basically, one of the very first things, and this was designed to prevent rebellion from happening again, was this is why samurai had to travel so often.
Yeah, you can't just stay in one place and develop a power base.
Well, you had to have two homes, and you changed, I believe, literally with the seasons. You had your base, you had your home base, which is where you collected your taxes and your rice revenues. And then you had your local jurisdiction in Edo, which is why it grew so quickly, because all warrior class needed to have a home in Edo. Because you have to stay there for part of the year.
You had to go there to go and talk to the emperor about what you were doing at home. Well, not the emperor, the shogun, what you were doing at home.
And you had to stay there partially for the year, so you couldn't spend time developing cadres at home.
Or, for example, building a bunch of guns to try to overthrow the shogun.
Also, all of these roads essentially led to people using them, and since roads typically lead to cities and towns, this led to Japan being surprisingly urbanized for what is essentially still just emerging from what is essentially the medieval era. Their own medieval.
There's a reason why Meiji was able to succeed in reforming Japanese culture fairly quickly. And it's because, for all of their faults, the Tokugawa shogunate left them with a very strong base to start from.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. A good way to put it is almost that Japan
the only thing
was
they were missing were railroads, and that's pretty simple to set up.
A good way to put it is that Japan in the 1600s is a lot like Europe at the turn of like the 1400s, where it's essentially a Renaissance era. There's a transition away from this old structure of feudal nobility towards the idea of a nation state almost.
Mm-hmm. Yoshi, but now we move on to the next one, the red light district, because
why not?
Any society, with any society that has large urban centers, sex.
This is actually huge with Japan. The Japanese culture is kind of weird in that a lot of what are considered modern hang-ups with Japan kind of come from both the rapid industrialization and the post-World War II period, where MacArthur basically orders the censorship of everything, because that's MacArthur, and I've already discussed in length how much I hate him, so I'll stop.
Basically, prostitution, while you're considered a hinen, an undesirable, it wasn't punished. In fact, actually, it was condoned.
Mm-hmm.
And also, you had official districts for this.
Also, unlike other even East Asian cultures, it wasn't uncommon to have to see men be prostitutes, and for that not to be considered the most disgusting thing you could ever do with your life.
Yeah.
Yeah, you were considered low, but you were still higher up than. And actually, it depended on what type of work you did besides prostitution, because there are different levels. There are different levels, and some are just artisans who also happen to do that. Some are actually, some are just purely that. Also, ultimately, the big reason during this time period was because it also prevented men from rebelling if they were too busy losing their money to whores.
That was also part of it.
That's why
another interesting. Another interesting fact with this is, and this isn't in the book, but this is just one of those random things I picked up somewhere, and I have the need to share it. Sweet potatoes are associated with the sex trade in Japan because it was used for there was a lubricant that was made for that out of like the sweet potato paste. Weirdly enough, mostly for butt stuff, but
yeah. Anyway, I'm just gonna say the one last little tidbit. It's this sort of more relaxed attitude on sex and other things that also comes where Japan's weird cultural hang-ups with like feminine men and other sorts of weird gender standards come from.
It's a weird mix because for one thing,
they don't consider it gay. They quite literally do not consider it gay.
Yeah. Because remember, Japan industrialized extremely quickly. There was the post-war period where MacArthur comes in and basically says, "You can't do any of these things. You must censor all of this."
How what? Stream chat member.
How what?
We're not teaching you how to make sweet potato.
We're not going to teach you how
to
make sweet potato butt paste, okay?
No offense, but that's not how our show goes. I know we've opened with a gag on Black Tokyo, but no.
But yeah, that's something that was the truth. That was a weird thing back in there, and I collected it somewhere, and it's just one of those things that's been kicking around the back of my brain.
Speaking of things kicking around the back of the brain, the thing is, these weren't purely sex districts. It's not just brothel after whorehouse. No, this was where your entertainers, this is kind of like your equivalent of, not quite Hollywood, but kind of. This was where your vaudeville acts, your performances, and a variety of other things, gambling dens. This is
not like Hollywood. This is, I was about to say, this is the Vegas Strip, basically. This is where you would go to have a fun time.
Yeah,
you'd go to these districts.
Kabuki theaters where they, have the fun comedic plays. You'd watch people paint or buy paintings. You could just enjoy a cup of tea there. You don't have
to. There were a lot of tea houses. There were a lot of brothels. There were a lot of gambling dens, and sometimes all three were all combined.
Also, just as a reference, one of the things we probably consider with most old traditional Japan, kabuki at this point in time is only about 100 years old as an art form.
Yeah, it came around
very
during
new
the
at this time.
Sengoku Jidai period.
Puppet theater, like shadow puppets, were more popular, I think, at this period.
Older forms, I believe No was an older form. There were
No was the oldest form of Japanese theater.
I forget the name of it, but there's a style of comedy where you sit in what's called a seiza, where you're on your knees, and you literally perform just with your voice and your face intonations. But that's actually is also a very popular. You don't remember, do you? It's fine. I don't either.
It's okay. I don't either.
It's literally a tongue twister. That's the whole gag, is that you can say the whole fucking thing. That's the gag.
Really?
Well, it's essentially, there's this really dumb Japanese story about essentially parents that want their kid to be born lucky, so they give him every good luck name, to where his name's like this. It's a horrible tongue twister. Or pai, but it's it's like it's so fucking long. But part of the joke is that you essentially, everyone says it in what gasp. So during the whole story, every time the character's brought up, you have to say the entire fucking name
all over again if you screw up.
Yeah, which legitimately results in the character drowning to death, because by the time people start saying, "Hey, that guy is drowning." Wait, who? You him? Yeah, him. Oh, he's dead.
By the way, fun fact, one of the cases in Phoenix Wright deals with one of those performers. I forget the name of the style of performance, though.
Yeah, as we mentioned,
also Bunraku came out during this time, which is the proper art of very impressive puppetry, where you have full swivel ball joints and shit.
There's also a secondary art of just shadow puppetry that's also very popular. I think that there is even a yokai based around that. I could be wrong.
Oh, they even go into the different clades of sex workers. They mentioned the Oiran in particular, which, they did sex work, but they were most often just entertainers and fashion models.
I'm just gonna.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm gonna say this. Just one last thing, just as a fucking, because Jumgen, Goka Tsukai, Kaigai Surano, Sunematsu, Uremasu, Furimasu, Kunaroku ni Sumana Koro, Yabarochi no Burakori, Pai Shurigan no Goporing no Popobing, Gai Amchona no Chosuke. That was their entire fucking name.
How embarrassing.
Oh, wow.
Also, I know for a fact I said that. I said half of those words wrong, but I just, for my own sake, I felt like I wanted to do that.
But yes, it's also important to note that like these districts of Edo also influenced heavily the fashion and what was popular culturally in Japan, because almost everyone went through these districts. Like, you've got to understand that, like,
including the yokai.
Everyone was involved in this sort of trade one way or the other. You would not have a person that would not, at the very least, occasionally maybe go to a play or go to a tea house if they lived in the city.
Although here's the thing, you needed the money.
Which is why they mentioned it was sort of a weird place where there was equal opportunities, to where if you were a poor noble, you'd get less preferential treatment than a rich merchant or
Not
rich
only
farmer.
that, but you might even get kicked out if you just don't have the scratch.
It was also important to note that you couldn't carry weapons openly in this area, which was because one of the big principal things the samurai class was allowed to do was that the samurai class was allowed to openly carry weapons on their hip. They were allowed to openly carry their swords. That was a thing that the guy before, what's his name? Before Tokugawa.
Yeah, Jesus Christ, I forget his name because all I know him for is being that idiot. Let's just call him the monk.
Toyotomi?
Toyotomi, thank you.
Hideyoshi
Toyotomi. His entire thing was cementing the status of the samurai class, and Tokugawa just kind of kept with it. Which is funny because Toyotomi probably wasn't actually a samurai.
He was a minor noble, best well known for being Oda Nobunaga's sandal carrier.
There's even rumors that he wasn't actually a minor noble. He was just some random dude that Nobunaga just kind of said, "You're my sandal carrier now because you're at least somewhat intelligent."
He kind of did that sometimes.
Yeah, Nobunaga did weird experiments. He also experimented with those Portuguese missionaries. In fact, actually, the man who killed him, I believe his son was one of the experiments where he actually allowed the Jesuits to have their hands on his son to teach him to be a Christian or something, and the father took very ill offense to that, and despite being loyal to the man for like 10 years, fucking kills him in a suicide mission.
Also, as an unironic thing, it's through Otonoga we got the legit only black samurai.
Yes, Yasuke.
Who has been overblown completely, but still a funny historical fact.
It's a fun historical figure, much like the guy around Neo, whose name I forget, who is also another guy that kind of in this era ends up a samurai.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, and speaking of which, on just because of the free-willing nature on gender, things kind of go in this time period. While there's still a divide, as they mentioned with the red light districts, women can be pretty darn influential.
Yes.
Like, maybe in hard combat you'd be limited if you're gonna play historically straight, but in terms of influence and ability, no. And on top of that, this you're not looked down upon for being weird, for being gay or anything like that, for doing other men or other women.
So long as you still fulfilled your heterosexual obligations.
Yeah, as long
as you stayed in the district.
That's the whole concept.
What's in Yoshiwara stays in Yoshiwara.
There's literally a term, Uyako, which means the floating world. It's essentially where you're in the red light district, it's like a completely different world with completely different norms, almost.
Yes, it's also important to note that this is why, for example, madams often had a incredibly influential role.
It's also why the supernatural are drawn to this area.
Yes, because it doesn't matter if you're a female vampire, as if you can run one of the better brothels in Edo, you've got enough to feed for.
You can do a simple tea house, run a great kabuki theater, all three.
There's a lot of ways to just slightly influence society in ways that you want it to go if you know what you're doing.
Anyway, one last little thing about the degeneracy before we move on to the caste system. Japan is one of the few cultures in the world to where the idea of banging the supernatural was not the most unknown concept.
Oh God, no! Oh my God! There are a lot of stories of Japanese,
and not just in the like, oh, the monster, was lying all along. They were monster. No, like they full on, yeah, they fucked.
Yeah, like there's like the spider demon woman that
the snow women. The Japanese were always
Japanese
horny.
There's a bazillion foxwife tales.
I think it's Juragumo, then Yukiona, the Kitsune. But there's also one of my favorite ones was the guy manages to marry a spirit, and the spirit only has one request: do not look upon them while bathing.
Of course, they break it, and
they find out that they're a spirit animal, and embarrassed.
The Swan Wife.
Angry.
That's the Swan Wife story. It's the Swan Wife story.
Yep, and embarrassed and angry, she leaves him.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the only reason it's mentioned is because a thing that will sometimes be mentioned in these kinds of things is the idea of monster-blooded hunters and other things.
There is a lot of.
Just wanted to introduce that as we leave the quite literal degeneracy.
Yeah, the fact of the matter is that you've also got to remember that the emperor himself is considered to be part divine and is supposed to consummate that with the gods themselves. There is a still tradition to this day where there is a small building that is built for the new emperor where they will then go and then fuck the sun goddess. Supposedly. It's a little weird. But that's just sort of the nature of Japan at this time, is that the idea of someone that is partly blooded supernaturally is not unusual or even undesirable. Kitsune blooded families were considered the ones that were very, very lucky oftentimes.
And also on top of that, it's a case of not all yokai cause trouble.
Yeah. Yokai just means strange thing. It doesn't necessarily mean demon, though many people translate it like that. It's more like just thing we don't know.
Like, for example,
unusual.
Those Sukuramane, the 99-year objects, yeah, some of them are malevolent tricksters that screw over those in the house. Yeah. But some are actually helpful, like, sometimes they might be able to move in places where you always need them. Or
others are just, others are literally like supernatural, like protective forces in your house. They are very, very good luck, and they will bring you good fortune.
Like the lion dogs.
Yes. Other times it's literally like this is if there's like a tool that becomes one of those, that oftentimes it's considered a very, very lucky tool and a very, very good tool that will produce things that are better than if you weren't using it.
Oh,
things like that.
One of the most noted examples I can think of in terms of that shift in variety are the Tengu, because they started as sinister wind demons, and by the end of it, they just kind of became very wild, reclusive monks.
Yeah, it's quite interesting. The other one that kind of changes like this is the raccoon dogs, the Tanuki. Who there's a lot of weird Tanuki woodblock prints from this time involving their testicles. I highly recommend you Google it. It's really weird. It's really wild. Japanese folk mythology is full of very interesting concepts that, to an outsider, look absolutely bizarre.
Like the gigantic foot that demands you wash it. That's an actual yokai.
Or the giant skeleton that causes tinnitus.
Oh, not only that, but it's completely invisible and undetectable until it appears right in front of you or behind you.
Also, the hair.
It's always behind you. It's always behind you. You can never see it, but there's a gigantic skeleton causing your ears to go.
But yeah.
But anyway, the caste system. Let's leave this degeneracy. This isn't supposed to be Black Edo.
Let's move on. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. But yeah, we all know. I think it's not an idea what a caste system is. It was imported from the the West, technically, because India is west of Japan.
A bit of it is sort of a holdover from the early days of Chinese contact with Japan.
Yeah, which is still West, which is still technically West.
But some of it's also due to Buddhism, because Buddhism was formed to kind of oppose the concept of the caste system anyway. And in Japan, in particular, there were 4 castes.
Yeah, you had, of course, the Edda, which are kind of they're the ones we mentioned earlier. They're the undercast. They're the untouchables, essentially.
And they can't leave. You can only be dragged down to their class.
The giant skeleton appears and then eats you. Oh yeah, or just touches you and dies.
And you die. The yokai are weird, and a lot of them are. Again, I highly recommend you listen to that podcast that I recommended earlier. It's very, very detailed on the topic and how people can become yokai and how yokai can change over the time. Because
and don't forget the weird onomatopoeias some of them have. Like that giant skeleton, part of its name is actually the thing that it kind of rattles.
But yeah, and the 4 castes generally are the samurai are on the top. Samurai and the nobles, but generally the samurai, and they actually make up a not insignificant amount of the population.
Yeah. Samurai basically became, at this time, anyone who bore weapons. So there were a lot of people in the transition to Edo period Japan who were ashigaru before, or were, for example, just armed retainers, that ended up being elevated to full samurai for service in Korea. For
lowly samurai, mind you, but not like not even the kind of samurai that could, like, not even the samurai that could have in the day afforded full on armor, but samurai nonetheless.
Like, to give you an idea, back in the day, like, this was a massive widening of the noble ranks, which it makes sense. It's one of the quickest ways to also secure loyalty because, hey, guess what? They fought alongside you. They're pretty loyal.
Mm-hmm.
Yes,
and they're still allowed to keep weapons, which
also, as I mentioned, Edo contains nearly half of the entire samurai population at any time.
Yes, because it is the Tokugawa method. Well, not only bureaucrats, but again to keep control, because you have to go there. If you're a samurai, you have to go to Edo at least part of the year.
Yes, there's
and then
more
below
too.
But then below them are the
not the artisans. That's actually the farmers.
No, yeah, I meant the farmers. The farmers.
Because again, partially because they wanted to guarantee that famine never was a thing again. But part of it is you own land, and in Japan, land is king.
And you produce. Besides, they produce things.
Because Japan, here's the thing, it's a very mountainous island chain, so having arable farmland actually kind of makes you a big deal, even if you're a poor yeoman farmer. Because not a lot of people actually own the land they control. So that's why they're actually surprisingly high up in Japanese society. There's also some Buddhist logic because of the hard work they do. Like, they're usually considered more virtuous. That's another element.
Speaking of virtues,
land and gain value. Yeah. Then it is the artisans, which, fun fact, Edo has a stupid amount of them during this time.
Speaking of virtues, that before we move on back into the class, we should actually move on to speak at least the monsters and like how some monsters are more of a problem for other castes than others. Like, Ventrue Vampire is not likely to be found terrorizing the farmers.
What do you know? Yeah. Maybe they're just there the entire time and they sleep in the barn.
This also means that, for example, like your average kappa is probably not going to attract the attention of a samurai unless they start drowning samurai.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, vampires would at this point most likely cling to the court of a samurai or a daimyo.
Unless they're like unless they're the Nos.
Oh, the Nos, they're hanging out in the floating world, making paintings.
It's also important to note that theoretically speaking, a samurai can kill anyone who isn't a samurai with justification, just flat out.
Yeah.
Yeah, they may strike. Well, they need to have at least have affronted their honor.
And this is why Legend of the Five Rings is a terrible system.
Now, that said, abusing this would almost instantly get you killed. Through legal cases and through someone else coming after you.
Because there, even if there's not a legal system, there is a social system that keeps you from just killing the peasants.
Like, it's one thing, like, let's say you're a samurai, right? And you commission a very glorious painting of, say, your grandfather standing alongside, I don't know, just insert any of the major leaders of the Sengoku. And the artist fucks you over or gives you a horrible piece of work out of spite. You could kill them, and most people would probably applaud you.
Or you're carrying that, or you're carrying that for, or you're going to present a gift to the shogun or the emperor, someone important.
That's another thing.
This disgusting, and this disgusting fucking peasant had the gall to like splash mud on it.
Yeah,
that would
would
more
definitely
iffy, but people would probably still back that.
People would probably be like, that's a little bit of an overreaction, but we can understand it.
Then there's just and
then you bumped into me in the road. How dare you die, peasant!
Then there's that. You probably
do that,
won't be killed for that.
Another samurai might actually go and, out of their sense of honor, go and kill you.
Yeah. Like, you have to have a good reason, and that's a thing that the Legend of the Five Rings people... I'm bringing them up because this system is in that game.
It's mostly one person who obsesses over that.
Yeah,
John
and you
Wick.
need to punish them. You need to punish them by just having the better duelist just be there as a DM and kill that fucker.
Or just have it that, well, yes, then there's a scorpion who knew that guy that kills you. Because you ruined their plan.
You need to make damn sure, though, that duelist dies. And it's usually an asshole who plays a crane that does this.
It almost is always cranes that are asshole duelists, but there's a lot of ways to deal with that. Namely, you just have a scorpion poison them.
In a lighter side, this could be the idea of samurai honor could be an interesting tool to use depending on your party.
Yeah, it's similar to how paladins can be interesting because they have a code of conduct that they're supposed to honor-based, non-aggression pact.
Basically, because it's also
I just thought of it, and a hilariously easy way to find a justification to kill a monster is if they are cloaking themselves in the garb of a peasant. Find some excuse to where they've offended your honor, and then go out and kill them, and no one will question.
I got it. Here's how. You kill them, and then you present a weapon that they were hiding.
Of course, that's actually not a bad way to do it.
That's a very effective way because only
literally you're pulling the good old NYCPD trick. Like, they totally had a gun on them the entire time.
Well, that's the thing, because only samurai are allowed to have weapons. That's a pretty good justification to kill them.
Yeah. Now, mind you, almost everyone had at least a knife, but.
No, but
that's not a weapon.
You're a monster. Well, the thing is, but if you're a monster, you probably have access to more, sneaky things.
Yeah.
Because a knife alone, that'll stop you, especially with your unnatural monster strength. But sometimes you need something bigger that makes things fuck off.
Yeah. Now, that said, when we go into the next bit, it's also important to note that this is all defensive. You can only also do, like, a single strike. So most oftentimes, you just have a samurai slap someone, or...
I'm envisioning.
Hit them.
Lash.
I kind of wish Biggie was here because he actually played the Afro Samurai once. But I'm just envisioning his Afro Samurai character pimp smacking the calamari vendor.
That's unironically what would
burned his food.
That would unironically be considered justified. You'd be considered an asshole, but it would be considered justified.
However, they also mentioned, with all fairness to the strike down rule, that if the peasant could legally find a way to legally justify that they were in the right, they could get the samurai in trouble.
Yes, legal. This was another thing. Not only that, they were legally obligated if it was above that. If they, for example, if you, for example, stepped on a samurai's shoe and they tried to kill you, you could legally be considered in the right if you dodged that first strike, to then, if they kept attacking you, to kill them. There were legal cases like this.
And on top of that, here's the thing. If samurai abused this, and this is very amazing, and this is something you should totally port to Legend of the Five Rings to punish that creator and all crane assholes. After they abuse their one strike rule, if they continue, or if they are abusing the right, they're put to death. And this is the thing. Not only are they put to death, their household and family station is also fucking removed.
Yes,
because there's only had the justification of a single defensive strike to defend your honor.
Yes,
not full on assault.
Yeah, this is like, I have been offended severely. I have a reason to believe that this person is dishonoring me or the emperor or whatever else, and I am defending the honor of the country, me, the shogun, all that. So.
Like in the Biggie's character case, I'll kind of call him his surname. If Nakamoto-san has his fried food burned to a crisp, he's only has the right to pimp smack that vendor once.
Yeah, he can pimp smack the vendor.
Yeah,
and no one's gonna be really too mad about that because, like,
Because you can look, that calamari's burnt to shit, bro.
That calamari's burnt, and the vendor fucked up. Like, this is the thing where it's like...
He didn't pull out a sword, he just pimp smack a justice.
Yeah, and now if he cut him down, then there's going to be people that start asking questions. He's legally in the right, but there's going to be a lot more questions asked, especially if another body happens.
Or if they saw him swing a second time.
Yes.
And also with speaking of the violent tendencies of samurai, as things move on, the violent samurai, like the ones who just can't accept the roles, they are more, and who don't have daimyos to be sworn to, or they're not guards, or they're not officials, they're ronin.
It's basically hire.
While traditionally a ronin should just off themselves, the reality was
that didn't happen nowhere near as often.
Now, oftentimes, ronin would find themselves employed as essentially in the red light districts as bodyguards.
This is where the beginnings of the Yakuza come from.
Yes, to some degree. This is
they
where
you get
hired
for bodyguard and merchant caravans too.
Yes,
usually.
It was considered an honorable position to be a guard for a merchant. In many cases, it wasn't, of course, ideal, but it wasn't also.
You're still fulfilling. Your
honorable is the wrong word. Honorable is the wrong word. No, honorable is the wrong word. It was considered a profitable.
It was considered an acceptable.
But at the same time, it's the closest to being a samurai that you're probably going to be until you find a new master.
Yeah, it was an acceptable job compared to maybe grubbing it up with the peasants.
Now, the absolute most degenerate, besides bodyguards who became the Yakuza, would be if you just say screw it and embrace piracy.
Yes.
There were samurai clans that embraced it, like the Soul.
And bandits. Bandits.
Now, next up, you had the farmers as the next caste, which, of course, they are very
actually, they
respected.
go into details. Samurai were not wealthy as a rule. A lot were, but quite a few were still destitute.
And since the samurai were typically paid by the daimyo stipends, if the area the daimyo ruled, which remember, since war's over, you can't have like those lootings anymore. So you lived in shit country, you got shit wages, which means you had shit paid samurai.
Which leads to a very interesting concept of, I'm thinking of this for like a one-shot hunter scenario. Prometheans caused wastelands.
Yeah, you've got to deal with a Promethean on your land that's causing to be shit.
And this famine is unnatural. Everyone else's lands are doing better. I mean, there's some areas nearby yours that are shit, and they're blaming you. They think there's a bad spirit. There's a bad spirit affecting your land. And they're right, only it's not a full spirit, it's a weird semi-human homunculus thing. They go into detail about the women of Edo as well.
And going back to traditional ideas, it wasn't considered proper to have women train in katan and how to use a sword, but to use a polearm instead because of their body.
Because women who defend, one of their duties was to defend the homestead.
Yeah, it's the role of women in the samurai culture is actually quite interesting, but we're getting off to the weeds.
Yeah,
so
that's why we're not going over it.
As for what samurai usually would deal with, like if you're a samurai character, mages are very common, as well as demons, because demons love to play the power games.
And also infiltrating the nobility is one of their favorite things to do any time period, anywhere, because it's a great route to being able to influence things and to hopefully create hell.
So in all samurai party, you don't have to be. I'm just, as an example, in all samurai party, you could be dealing with a group of demons doing a scheme. That's just fair enough. Like, you could just deal with that. Or you find out that your rival house doesn't actually exist. That, that house that your family feuded with for decades, they never were a thing.
Or if you're more over the magical things, your samurai that have been tasked with aiding an omoji from dealing with what is believed to be a sorcerer.
Or alternatively, it's possible that a mystic, from the academy board, like from the Japanese investigation boards, like a proper mystic that's been vetted, might have issues like, oh no, something went wrong with this mystical experiment. One of my students has been possessed.
And now you have to deal with it.
You're the best hope I have.
But now we move on to the farmers, and Well,
Second highest.
A farmer makes rice. Rice makes Japan. Japan.
Yeah. Now, it's also important to note that they were very tight-knit. They also typically owned their own land. They just paid taxes to the local lord. The local lord didn't actually own their land.
This isn't feudalism.
Yeah. Japanese feudalism is a little bit different. It's more like samurai or tax collectors.
It's more capitalistic.
The way to describe it is, okay, let's say you have like a family of, not a family, but like 100 farmers in an area. One of them is the daimyo because, like, collectively you produce 60,000, you produce like 180,000, bushels of rice, right?
Yeah.
And this one guy makes about 60,000 of it, like 1/3. Technically, he could be daimyo over all the other 99 guys. But you still have your own, like your home farmland that makes like 1,000 bushels or like 20,000 bushels. Yeah, you just have to pay taxes to the samurai. You still own your shit, and you can sell it and do what you want with it. If you choose not to sell rice, if you choose to grow barley for like soba noodles, you could totally do that.
Yeah, it was much more free than people expected of this era for farmers.
And another case is if, say, you manage to buy out a rival and you make magically 50,000. Now there's 2 daimyos technically.
Potentially, there's a limit
Edo
on.
approves your decision because of your production rate.
Mm-hmm.
Edo actually, it was only those at the time that were making more than that got the daimyo title.
But if your production levels got high enough, you could easily become one.
But generally, the farmers don't actually interact much with the urban population.
No,
so they're probably
obvious reasons.
What?
Now that being said, there are plenty that do sometimes go into town for labor pools.
I know, but I'm going into the sense that, as they say, mostly due to their generally rural lives, their problems are a bit different from the things they have to deal with werewolves.
Yeah, they have to deal with a lot of other bullshit.
The cop.
Like Kappa, for example, and
funny skeleton that makes your ears tingle.
Yeah,
vampire
skeleton.
That's other shit.
Funny skeleton the size of my house.
Yeah, that one's one of my favorite yokai because it's just so ridiculous.
My favorite is the 8-foot tall vampire lady who just goes and abducts children.
That's fun too.
Now we have the artisans. They are only just above the merchants.
Yeah,
they're a little bit better since they still produce something. But the reason they're lower is, at the end of the day, despite the emperor's obsession with it, despite the noble's obsession with it, art isn't critical. You can survive in a world without art.
Mind you, artisan also encompasses things like tool makers.
Yeah.
Well, those are rated higher though because that has a function.
Yeah, it's kind of weird like that. But
basically,
anyway,
it's not as critical as a farmer because you'll starve to death in a month without food. You don't need a painting. You don't need to watch a puppet show.
You don't need clothes. Actually, you do need clothes.
You want clothes, and you kind of need them, but it's not as critical as food. Mm-hmm. And yet also critical.
As they mention it here. The farmers provide to taxes, which go to daimyo, and those daimyo then essentially they are the ones that pay for the services of these artisans.
Or also sometimes the farmers, if they're rich enough already, they'll pay for artisans too, because farmers do have festivals of their own.
Yes, and of course you might need to hire someone to fix a house, or to maybe like if you're a rich farmer. And there were rich farmers, might want to commission, like, say, a nice piece of art for a family shrine, or things like that.
And especially
we need
in this
to hire
era
an artisan to fix up our graveyard because the ghosts are getting angry.
And especially in this era where everyone's looking within and looking for advancement and for more, artisans have become much more important, even if they're not officially.
Yeah, these are the people that invented tea ceremonies. They make your chinaware. They make a variety of art. They make your clothes. They make your tools. They make you happy.
And with everything that makes you happy, vampires want them.
Vampires will ruin it. So will the Fae. That's kind of what they talk about. Almost everyone.
Artisans have to deal with literally every one of these fuckers.
Because artisans have to deal with almost everyone. It doesn't matter who they are. Someone's going to need a tool, or they want a new dress.
Vampire wants to commission something, or the Fae need something that they've made, or like an ephemeral concept.
Or they want you.
Market.
Or they want you.
Well, no, it's like the changelings need something from you for the goblin market, or or demons want your identity for like one day of the week.
But speaking
Prometheans
of
just want to hang out near you because they think your puppet shows are cool.
But speaking of things that getting things that people want, merchants are considered just below the lowest of the low, just
because
above the lowest.
Merchants merely move, in Japanese, Chinese, and Confucian logic, and Buddhist to a degree, they don't make money. They move it. They don't make things. They merely move it around, which means that they're lesser.
It also means that, technically speaking, all of the Dutch are in this class, so they're barely above not people, which is very convenient for the Japanese.
They're barely above not people, which is
however
the greatest description of the Dutch I've ever heard.
However, which in a trend which the Europeans know very well, very quickly, due to the fact war stopped being a thing and the nobles since had to lift off only taxation, essentially, since they couldn't really tax their inner trade anymore. The merchants got extremely wealthy extremely fast, while the nobles languished in relative poverty.
Yep, and here's how the Dutch made such a killing. Essentially, to call back to greater periods of time, especially since, hey, guess what? Ming's entering Shitsville. What the Dutch would do to help prop up the flailing and dying Ming dynasty, because that's around that time, would be they would buy stuff at real cheap, either from the Ming themselves or from the oncoming Qing, and just foist it off of Japan, because those nobles fucking love Chinaware. They fucking love the works of art designed by Chinese hands. Because the Japanese, for a long period, because in Asian culture, China was considered the center of the world for a long period of time. You know, just because it kind of was. It was so powerful compared to its neighbors. And that reflects in Japan. Just kind of one of the things in the cross trade. And that's how the Dutch made their killing. They were in it for the money, baby.
It's also important to note that a lot of the issues that were had with the Japanese by the Chinese was the fact that there were a lot of pirates that the Japanese tacitly accepted because they'd bring them fun things like silverware, porcelain, silks, all of that sort of thing.
Sorry.
Just one of those things to note is that, technically speaking, this you might have a merchant that was running a bit of a criminal enterprise on the side, and it wouldn't have been a surprise to anyone.
Or just a noble family.
I was actually going to speak of that. It was actually around this time to where, among like murders and stuff like that, it was not you expect the samurai committing a lot of being the main reasons for a lot of murders. It was the merchants sometimes feuding with themselves.
Well, yeah, you know, anything for money. Don't get me wrong, there's entire clans of samurai that were pirates. There's a famous family from an island, one of the Japanese islands, that were noted for it. But 9 times out of 10, it was just merchants that were like, why should I pay 80 taels of silver for this luxury, you know, pottery collection, when I can just hire a bunch of ronin for like 20 taels being the Chinese currency, and just have them rob the shit out of it when it's on the ocean. And then I just sell it for 60 and I make, you know, a killing.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And but then, as we leave the merchants, we move into the
leave what are considered the last.
Well, no, there's also they mentioned the ukiyo-e, the wood blocks prints that I was talking about.
Oh, yes.
A very popular series of art.
The Fisherman's Wife and all that, and
yep, the merchants, basically, as they were getting wealthier and wealthier, they craved more and more luxuries, much like the samurai, so they commissioned a lot of artisans with their massive amounts of wealth.
And they made them do some very weird shit.
Mm-hmm.
Like the people on Twitter that commission.
It was Fiverr of another age.
It was Twitter. It was 18 plus Twitter accounts.
Yeah, this is like where all the Twitter furries would be.
Anyway,
you know
now we're moving on to the Untouchables. First are the
where the Twitter furries would be.
The Etas, who are ethnically... Well, sorry.
Before we do, Kegare. It's a form of defilement, which is an important concept to Shinto practitioners. Because the thing about Shinto practitioners is cleanliness is very high on their ranks of things you need to be.
Also, cleanliness and, well, basically being dirty can sometimes stain you forever.
It's not a moral defilement. It's a natural force, and it's a thing that everyone experiences every now and again. But it's not only the person, it's the area around them. And what creates this defilement, Kegare, is death, the death of an individual, childbirth, menstruation, illnesses, and just other unclean activities like butchering or tanning. Now, most of the time you just do ritualistic cleansings, but sometimes you hired... some places you're fucked. The Eta.
Because you don't want to get that shit. You don't want to have that stain you. And besides, the Eta are already stained. They can't go lower.
Yeah.
The infamous Coyote says, if I remember right, the infamous rivalry between the IJ and IGN had start between two clans. Yep, we mentioned that.
Yes, we did. And also, yes, it basically is an honor-based NEP.
But yeah, and also another interesting thing about Kegare is you can kind of see this kind of idea of uncleanliness and kind of guilt based on association in a lot of old Japanese storytelling and myths, to where just people just are just horribly where people are either victimized or tortured, or horrible things happen to them, not because of any fault of they did, or even maybe their parents. Something related to them, something that happened in the vicinity of them.
It's also important to note that there is, even to this day, some discrimination against the people that are descended.
Oh yeah, you can see it if you go into the cities. There are some neighborhoods that are clearly the bad ones.
Where this was where they used to live, and if you have that sort of family history, it can be a little tricky to get a job in Japan.
To this day, the Eta are still a thing.
Good job. Yeah, like a good job in Japan. Like you might be still able to run the the pawn store that your dad built, that your grandpa made. Good luck getting a job anywhere else.
Yeah.
Like sure, you can get hired at a butcher shop, but
however, there's something lower than Eta technically.
Yeah, but technically, let's go into a little bit more on the Eta though. Basically, Eta and Hinin are so low, samurai could kill them without... You could literally just... A murderous psychopathic samurai.
They're literally not considered people.
They're not human.
They lived in horrible ghettos. And if you even talk to them, you would need to clean yourself.
If you were if you cannot touch them, basically. They are that unclean.
And unlike samurai who can kill, with honor, executioners, no, there's something completely different.
Yes, an execution isn't an honorable death. It's literally like the state disposing of someone. So therefore, executioners, torturers, to some degree, doctors, more accurately, surgeons were sometimes considered Eta. The other thing that's kind of interesting is that you would also have technically Hinin are also Eta, but not really. There's a slight difference in that Hinin is where you fall to become an Eta if you weren't one already. And then Eta is more of like a hereditary idea.
So here's another fun thing about the Eta. Before the Tokugawa period, before the Edo period, while they were in Shitsville, because of the war, some types of Eta actually lived better.
Yes.
Primarily leather workers.
Leather workers were considered incredibly valuable, so they actually got paid, and they actually got some respect, because quality leather armor was the difference between living or dying.
And so that fucking went away as soon as Tokugawa won.
Mm-hmm. And then there's just people kind of outside of it, like geishas and entertainers.
Yeah, but the thing
they're not true Eta. They're not true Eta, but they're not.
Yeah, Hinin are mostly hobos and murderers, criminals.
And then the Bijin, which is sort of the description of these other, which is like kabuki theaters, all that sort of entertainers, geisha, all that. It gets weird, basically.
Also, as completely expected, the supernatural thrive in these Eta communities, because who the fuck cares what happens to the Eta?
And on top of that, in some cases, they're massive recruiting grounds, particularly for the Nosferatu.
Yeah, I mean, hey, we work with the dead. What's a living corpse?
Exactly.
Mummy cult. I'm just envisioning mummy cult of like morticians.
Then that. Mm-hmm.
God, can't you envision the mummy cult of Japan just being?
Yeah, you could definitely run a very fun mummy game in Edo area, Japan. You'd definitely be new arrivals, or at the very least, you've only arrived in maybe pre-Sengoku Judai. But
you arrived sometime during the Nara period and fell asleep.
That's it. They were one of those Ming, ship. They were an artifact from Ming. At least that's how they got brought in.
I was thinking more like as a slight nod to because mummification was a thing on like the Tibetan steppes.
Well, yeah,
yeah. You started in China, but then Ming kicked you out.
Mm-hmm. And then, of course, speaking of mystical, outside of it, there's also priests and monks, which is, they're their own kind of thing removed from the social order.
Yep, and Buddhism was actually tied very strongly to military power until, well, it was broken. Mainly because the Buddhist warrior monks were beaten to death by the three unifiers.
Mostly because they kept, for whatever reason, they kept getting mad when the local peasants kept getting raped and murdered. And would go out and defend them oftentimes.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. But Shintoism and Buddhism are pretty fused and are pretty fused around here. So you can have gods, but you can also have Buddha, and it's completely okay.
Yeah.
Then of course there's just people who kind of are a-religious. It doesn't mean they don't believe. It just means they're not really practicing. Just to clear that up.
Yeah.
It's also important to note that the warrior monks, even in this era, were not completely wiped out. There are plenty of sects that had warrior monks because they needed to defend their temples.
Or just like the Shaolin monks, like it's just.
Or it was considered a form of meditation.
Yeah.
Those were usually the ones that survived, the ones that actually just stayed in their temples.
Yeah, so, mind you, it is completely viable if you wanted to play this to play a warrior monk. If you wanted to do that,
you will probably be watched most definitely by the state sect, though.
Oh,
anytime
yes, you
leave your temple.
But with that in mind, we're moving into the Vigil itself, which is our description of the Hunters. No, it's important to note that Western contact, as mentioned before, was kind of rare. So there's really not a lot of contact with any of the sort of organizations that you know from Hunter at this time.
There might be one or two that occasionally show up.
Well, in this case, they mentioned Aegis Kaidoru,
which is basically the relic boys that originally had Dante as their face claim in the original Vigil book. Featuring Dante from Devil May Cry. These
are the weirdos who believe in Atlantis, if I remember correctly.
Sort of, yeah. They're weird. Might be a Seers of the Throne plot. No one knows for sure.
They're one of the only conspiracy groups that made it and stuck.
Now that
however, they have completely lost any trace of their Western heritage. They've gone
native. Now you might also have, if you're playing a Jesuit or whatever, you might be part of the Maleficus Maleficarum, which is the witch hunters.
Because it would make sense for you to watch over the priests when they're negotiating or working.
And the Luciferge would probably be here as well to some degree. You might also get the Chiron group in one of its earlier incarnations, which is probably much more body horror.
Although, then again, honestly, there's also they're probably going to get killed by the Shogun.
Then there's also just kind of like very vague kind of concepts like the Union, which can be obviously not them in itself.
They wouldn't exist yet. We're going to get into this.
Well, the thing is, here's the thing. Yeah. Other than like a couple, no, there's homebrews. Yeah.
We're going to get into them, and they even go over what's actually there. So, as with most of the world,
some beautiful art of them murdering one of the yokai, the stretchy neck boys.
Stretchy neck boys, as there's a woman undressing in one of the corners because he wanted to peep.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. Of course, then there's always independents. There's always going to be some weirdos.
Well, the thing is, during the
hunters
Sengoku period, they were massively divided, but since everything's at peace, they're coming together to kind of face the same common threat. Mm-hmm. And this is where these compacts and conspiracies came about.
I know. I'm more just talking about maybe you grew up in a fucking mountain village, and there's always been the hunter of this village or something like that, the person that deals with the supernatural, but they didn't know shit about the rest of the world.
Yep. So the compacts include the Amasan, the Asusamiko, and the Bijin. Amasan come from the tradition of women pearl divers. They mostly fight, like, sea monsters.
Yeah, fishing communities. Then you've got the Miko, which, as I mentioned before, the nature of the Miko has changed dramatically over time. One of the big ones is that this is part of the reason why, like, how the Japanese view of nuns is kind of weird, is because Miko are oftentimes nowadays it's literally like a summer job that local high school students do.
Yep.
You just go to the shrine and you wear the outfit.
It's shrine maidens, yeah.
Yeah.
Back in the day, like, you literally it was a real serious thing.
Yes, it's as time went on, and especially after the Meiji Restoration, it kind of went from a devoted part of your life to this is more of a job.
Mm-hmm. Then there are the Bijin, who we mentioned before were had weird connections with the supernatural.
These are the artist cast.
Artists, yeah.
It's basically your prostitutes, your prostitutes,
it's a network
playwrights,
of prostitutes,
actors.
kabuki actors, puppeteers, artists, who, because they live in that floating world, ukiyo, they basically, their duties are, monsters kill my clients or abuse us. We don't like
that. Yeah. That this is basically like if you wanted to play more of your classic, like the Union, this is that.
They informed entirely because it was just to protect their jobs. Nowadays, at least initially. Nowadays, well, not nowadays, but like later on, they became different.
Yeah,
now we
move to conspiracies, as I mentioned before. Lucifers are here. There's not many.
However, there were two guys, and they made two different kind of cells.
Yeah. Then there's the Gacha Kaduro.
Well, they were investigating the Otodo, which
they're looking for the three treasures.
We'll cover them in a little bit. The next one is Gacha Kaduro, as mentioned. They're after a lot of the sacred things. Nezumi, for example, are probably something that they want to get their hands on.
Well,
or whatever the term is. Whatever the term is for like an awakened artifact. I think it's like Nezumi or Tsukugomi or whatever. Like,
well, the living treasure, the living objects are Tsukugomanani, I think.
Yeah.
Nezumi is rat, and it's based on a famous
God
thief.
damn it! I'm thinking with Nezumi is because I'm thinking of Legend of the Five Rings, because they're really cool in that.
Well, it's rats, and like when I think of rat, I think of the famous thief Ebisu, who like had his wore a fucking weird headband that made him look like a rat.
Yeah. No, Nezumi and Legend of the Five Rings are really cool. But we're not talking about that. We might cover.
Yeah, now we're talking about the Ascending ones, who got here by the way of
back to this. Sorry, I've had a lot of branding.
Who got here by the virtue. Let me talk. Who got here by virtue of the Muslim eunuch Chinese admiral, he.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
And he brought and in this case, essentially, he was his fellow Muslims in this case, to where, at least that's how they're playing it. To say tonight, Edo houses a small handful of Muslim hunters who operates as mercenaries. Who the Ascending, just as a refresher, the Ascending, because their thing's a bit harder to nail down. The Ascending ones are, they're alchemists and mercenaries.
You know, it didn't have to be Islam just because.
No, they're Admiralty. They are mostly because they're also related to the Hashashins.
To Egypt. They're tied to Egypt.
Fair enough,
not ancient Egypt, not ancient Egypt, but like Caliphate Egypt.
Okay, but like if you want them to be alchemists, you could base them on Taoist monks. That was a very common thing too.
No, that's also a thing too. You could definitely do that, but this is more.
As I even mentioned, they've kind of blended their sort of weird Islamic mysticism with Buddhist Shintoism at this point.
Yeah, they're basically just mystic alchemists. Is the best way to think of it.
I wonder when the shogunate is going to kill them all off.
Who knows? They're probably going to blend in with like the local Shinto people.
And then there's the Malus Maktorum,
which, as I mentioned, these are the witch hunters.
But they're almost completely killed to a man.
Yeah.
They will not be relevant for long. And now here's the merchant thing.
They're relevant only in one area, and
there's only 3 of them, and they're basically on a timer.
Well, they're not quite on a timer. Basically, their only purview that they can really hold on to is Dejima. And that's just because it's the Dutch port. And most likely, these 3 are going to die, but if the Maleficarum stay, it'll only be on Dejima for a long time.
But for a more homegrown thing, the Hotogizu. These guys are interesting. These guys are quite literally, they fight the supernatural through money and connections.
Oh, you forgot the Ototo, which are a bloodline.
We'll get into them.
No, they're next. Well, they're next.
Oh, I didn't see the Hotogizu. Sorry.
Yeah.
Hotogizu, they're next. But yeah, unironically, they use their money to, among other things, buy essentially favors and even powers off other supernatural beings.
Well, not only that, but they also use money to buy magic.
Yeah, that's what I said. They buy supernatural abilities. It's that level of screw the rules, I have money.
It gets funnier too if you think about it, because it almost feels like, I don't know, you could refluff them as Wall Street bets.
Mm-hmm. And then there's the Otto. These guys are descendant of the union of monster fucking. Also, unlike the compacts, who in modern Japan are gone. They're just flat out gone. These conspiracies stuck around.
More accurately, the Hotogutsu, or however you put it, basically absorbed the compacts into themselves.
They became the massive corporations of that, essentially. They're not fucking. It's not Japan ain't an oligarchy, but to say that they don't have a massive impact on the running on the country would be a lie.
Yep, yeah, they're part of the Zaibatsu.
The compacts you see get absorbed by the Hotogetsu. And out of the conspiracies, other than the Lucifuge, it'd be the Aegis Kaidoru, most likely.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Now, what is to come as we're talking is that the fact of the matter is that this is a time of unification of the country, and for the next few hundred years, it's kind of going to stay as it is.
It's going to sink in.
Mm-hmm. There's kind of a stasis to the country.
Well, yeah, and there's beliefs that because of the unification, things are going to get better, and that they're going to be just another myth. But no, monsters don't thrive purely on bad times. They'll exploit bad times, but they exploit good times just as much, and actually, good times sometimes benefit them way more.
I mean, yeah, it's much easier. I mean, it's much easier to ingrain yourself with power in a time where things are a bit more stable for things like vampires.
Yeah, like, let's say I'm an undead monstrosity, I rose from the grave, and now I crave blood. Well, I mean, during the Sengoku Jidai, at any point, some asshole from a clan might, storm the town that I'm currently operating in and murder me accidentally, or,
or expose me.
Or expose me, or violently defenestrate me after having their way with me, somehow. So, I don't have to worry about that anymore. If I'm a weird changeling that is trying to hide from the courts, I don't have to constantly move around to avoid, like everything getting ripped apart. Same with demon. My covers aren't going to be blown as readily because, hey, guess what? I don't have to constantly move around to avoid the God Machine or just, it getting ripped apart.
Also, while some monsters may not be able to act as wild as they can, for instance, the werewolf clans probably can't make entire villages disappear anymore, but
I mean, werewolves are probably seething a bit about that, but on the other hand, they're also like, hey, it's fine.
Mm-hmm.
But because business is good, just, hanging out with these farmers, murdering spirits, and sometimes stealing and murdering an adult.
Now, that said, yeah, it's important to note that shapeshifting is an incredibly important thing in a lot of these monsters that you will be facing throughout Japanese history and culture and all that.
Mm-hmm. Also, as I go thing, unification of monsters, the monsters that aren't accounted in the normal, World of Darkness things like, vampires, do not consider, even though they are all, I guess, yokai to some degree, don't consider them one unified species, because they're not, and they don't even consider themselves to be.
Right. No, they're different creatures each time.
Mm-hmm. And just because you're a good Oni killer, doesn't mean you're going to be able to face just because you're able to, you say you're a hunter, a really skilled samurai who's able to even maybe fight an Oni. That doesn't mean you're going to be fucking. I mean, you may have no clue how to deal with some of the other stuff though. It's not unified.
Right.
Yeah, because there's some very interesting creatures, and some of them are just more of a you have to lock away and you can't really fight.
Mm-hmm.
Like, Yeah, you can kill an Oni. You've beaten Tengu in fights. How the fuck are you gonna stand up to a fucking sea bonds? Those things are massive and they're in the ocean, dude.
Or maybe you're one of those like weird mysticists who know like all the proper things to to be able to trap certain monsters into like loops to where they can't really do anything. That's not going to help when the Oni just crushes your skull.
Or it might not help if the mischievous Kitsune lady just laughs, saying, "Nice trick, here's mine."
Nice trick, here's mine. She just pulls her top down.
No, I mean like she traps you in a horrible.
They suck your soul out through talismans.
Yeah. But yeah, here's the thing. Here's some of the weird things you have to deal with. Hunters in Tokugawa Shogunate know of the weirder myths, like courtesans with wooden skin and voices like the shamisen, wolves among the Ainu, plagues of insects that burst your eardrums before burrowing into their skull.
And so many rats.
Oh, these are the spiritual cancer things, because Werewolf the Forsaken originally had this.
Yes, these are the spirit hosts. Now, on top of that, Ainu are essentially the original inhabitants of Japan.
The indigenous tribes and now forced into the far cold north.
Yes, remember that the Japanese people that you see today are actually Chinese and Korean transplants that came to the islands in around I want to say 200 AD or so, and then sort of just brought rice cultivation with them. And
kind of yes, kind of no. The Ainu came from what was known as the Jomon culture period, the ropewear guys.
They're closer in relation to the Siberian tribes.
Yeah.
Then after that, I forget the name of the next culture, but those were the proto-Japanese natives.
The old Chinese transcripts would label these as the Wa people. The dwarfs.
Original Was. Then there's the original Was. I forget the name of this version. Yayaro, I think, or something like that.
Just as a record just as a thing for the people, the Wa in early Japanese history is so unknown and unwritten by the Japanese themselves that the only reason we even knew there was such a thing as a Japanese kingdom is because the Chinese wrote about them
and made fun of them a lot. It's pretty funny.
The Japanese do not have really any records. The Japanese don't even have many even oral records about this time.
Look at these weird these weird manlets who worship the fucking wolf son or whatever the fuck it is.
They believe they
worship
have
the fox
blood.
or some shit. Like, we don't give a shit. They're dumb.
They believe they have divine blood.
They're dumb manlets who copy our culture poorly.
But anyway, to the Ainu, because the Ainu live hard fucking lives, they're much more. They're still fairly martial. And that marks them for suspicion.
They are, because they also have to deal with asshole Japanese merchants stealing their shit.
It's also important to note that they do travel quite a bit during this period as merchants themselves, because they're often trappers.
Yeah,
and furs are in demand.
Money.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, like I said, there's like three major emigrations. There's the Jomon, which is where they came from. There's like the Emishi / Proto-Japanese before the actual Japanese main strata came, and then there's the other half, which is your Chino-Korean ones, which brought the rice.
Then there are, and as I mentioned, they mentioned a few times, the Ainu have a very bad relationship with the werewolves. They're often the ones that hunt them down when they cause trouble.
Yeah, because they live up in Hokkaido, which is a horrible, cold, snowy nightmare land.
I know, as I've just mentioned, if you ever got to deal, so if you're playing a game and you got to deal with a werewolf, it may not be the worst idea to track down the local Ainu, the Ainu hunters.
They may know something that you don't.
Mm-hmm. Then there are the cold-eyed birds, the Tengu.
Oh yes, the Tengu. These ones are fun because mythologically they started far more malevolent. They started as far more sinister monsters, but they slowly became more neutral as time went on.
They kind of changed more into like mischief makers and monks and teachers and that sort of thing. Like not necessarily.
The Tengu will still worm into the eye sockets of the unsuspecting and build nests in your bones.
Yeah, like they're not necessarily always the nicest, but they're not necessarily always like completely evil as time goes on. At least in Japanese folklore, they can even be helpful.
Mm-hmm.
Yep, and this is reflected here. Some believe that the Tengu are horrors, nightmares granted feathers and laughing streaks, and that they'll worm into the eye sockets and build nests in their bones, as you mentioned. Others believe that they're guardians or protectors against the dead. And
yeah, they have a bad relationship with vampires.
The thing is...
Now, the question is, are these the Strix?
Yeah, because they are bird-like spirits. They sometimes do kill people. Sometimes they'll trick. But 9 times out of 10, they leave humans alone.
What they'll always do, though, is go after the vamps. What they'll always do is go after vamps.
Not only that, but they possess corpses.
So again, they're kind of in a weird spot where, is this the Strix? It can be in your chronicle.
It's based on what I'm looking at, these do look like the Strix to me.
Yeah.
Or it could be a case of sometimes yes, sometimes no. Sometimes this is a full-on, Tengu was written about in the myths, and sometimes this is a Strix that has been mistaken for one.
And if you're wondering, Strix are kind of related to, but not quite to vampires. They're malevolent spirits that kind of dog them whenever they get outed too much. Or
go to out them themselves.
Or whenever they see a vampire, their instinct is, fuck that vampire.
Because they're kind of loosely tied. In fact, there's in lore, if you're really curious, Strix are thought to be what vampires used to be before they got locked into that weird curse of theirs. Or vampires were a failed possession that moved onward from that.
Like a contagion, almost. There's a lot of potential origins for vampires.
Like a corpse fought off and killed the Strix that tried to possess it, and that's where maybe the first vampire strain came from.
And
yeah, like, who knows?
No one knows, but they are tied together, and Tengu in this setting really fucking hate vampires. They're not necessarily Strix. They could be your own spirit. They could be an interesting spirit that just occasionally possesses dead people, but have their own bodies otherwise. But you could just make them Strix if you wanted.
And for the rest, they mentioned that since this is also an era of peace, this is giving time for and unity. This gives time hunters to codify their findings and actually start doing things like not just like learning through trial and error, but actually like figuring out, like doing full on scholarship into the nature of monsters.
As I said, like recording information about the yokai.
Yeah, like why do these ghosts randomly become murderous?
Why do only certain parts allow the weird shape-changing fade to enter our reality? Why only these places?
And but the thing is, in the Chronicles of the Darkness, things are never so perfectly clear. There's no explanations of the Kunekune, which are the writhing monstrosities that just instantly drive you mad. They can't explain the Mr. Funny Skeleton who gives you tinnitus, man.
Yeah.
Funny Skeleton, they can't explain.
Haha, Funny Skeleton, man.
They can't explain Tsukigamon they can't explain the 99-year objects. They can't explain certain ghosts. And they can't also quite explain the spirits possessed.
They also, and one thing they mentioned, the thing that they really can't explain is they mentioned why sometimes these monsters just have no hostility. And while some, oftentimes it's often aggressive, they have no clue why some aren't.
Yeah, like this type of ghost, why isn't it randomly killing people that enter its house?
Yeah, and
why does it want to just talk with people? Why?
Yeah, they also mention a lot of other stuff that comes into this. This entire thing is actually a good link of like all of the.
Oh hey, they mentioned the father of Bunraku, Chikamatsu Monzaemon.
Yeah.
If you're wondering, forbidden love is an issue that's growing more and more because of that social stratification. Because, hey, times of war means you can enforce rules again. And what's been happening more and more recently have been double suicides. Those who cannot meet because of their social standings.
So they're looking at ghosts and spooky shit like that with that. Then, of course, you've got, the Gacha Kaduro, which is that giant skeleton that makes your ears go nuts that they're talking about.
Them bones, them dry bones.
The spooky bone man.
Spooky tinnitus-causing bone man. But yeah, those guys are horrifying. They're basically... In Japanese myth, they are what happens when an entire town dies of starvation.
Well,
Yeah.
they don't happen as much anymore because
famine spirits.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. They thankfully aren't as common now, but...
Then we're only like 10 pages into this, by the way. Then we get like the pearl divers and the spirits that happen in the water.
Yeah, like the boat spirits.
Along with, of course, the hungry dead, but that's kind of one of those traditional things. Then we get into
Machinations of Onyodo.
Those are the magicians.
Magicians and other
in service of the
in
service of the shoguns. In service of the shogun.
There's also the Ansho.
Yeah, there's two things where they describe it. So let's do the one on the left before we do the one on top.
Okay, so the one on the left is the Ansho, which is the idea of these magically dead areas that you can't cast awakened magic in them for whatever reason. Now, there's some...
no, it's more than that. Any creature can't cast shit.
Yeah.
Now, if they're active, like if it's already active, it won't go, but you can't cast.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So if that Nos casts an illusion to make himself look like a normal person, it won't pop, but he can't. But if he gets caught in there, he can't pop on again.
Yeah. There's a lot of how would I put it? Options with this, where the idea is that there's a lot of places that they're trying to make and trying to build that could be used for this.
They happen in tight places of humanity, where essentially the norms of humanity are so strong it blocks magic.
Yeah, but again, there's a lot of that. There's also, of course, a mix of talking about like how there's other things. The other interesting thing is that it stops endowments as well, except for the Hotsiguyo, or however you pronounce it.
The Oni blooded, the Oni blooded, if you want to.
No,
that's the Todo. This is the Hototogitsu.
Hotsugo. Yeah, those are the merchants. The merchants.
So money apparently has the power to override weird reality rules. Who knows?
Well, actually, that makes sense because
they did start as a clan of bumpkin like kind of quasi sorcerers.
I'd say it actually also makes sense. I'd say it also would make sense since this is it's literally since it only appears in pockets of where humanity collects. It's because money is a very human concept.
Yeah. There's also, of course, talk about one of these clans that may be trying to do something weird. That are probably mad magicians. There's a talk also about other blood-drinking yokai. Which they mention, for example, that there are weird umbrella of one-eyed ghosts that murders lumps of flesh, all these other things. And then, of course, the fact is that a bunch of different yokai might drink blood. A Kappa attack could be a fae, a vampire, a spirit, or a weird beast monster. You don't know
or something else. Or
something else entirely.
Don't mind me. I was just trying to figure out how to explain the Ansho. Basically, they're little dead zones that you can, as a hunter, you can kind of exploit. Because if you trap a monster in an area, if you manage to find an Ansho and you lead them to it and they don't know it, they can only rely on fuck you.
Well, they can rely on the fact that they're stronger, faster, and all those other things, but it
removes a lot of the negatives that you have to deal with.
They can't just mind control you anymore.
Now the thing is, again, you don't quite know. Another thing is there's wolves in the palace. There's a particular clan called the Tsuchimikado.
That's what I just mentioned. This clan that may be filled with magicians, but then after that is the blood drinking yokai.
Yep. You went a bit ahead, dude.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
A little bit. I was just trying to explain the Ansho. But yeah, blood drinking yokai. There's the Kaso Bake, which are the umbrella ghosts.
Yeah, with the one leg and the eye and the tongue. Yep. They're weird.
There's the Kekai, which are horrible lumps of flesh. Yeah, but in general, blood drinking yokai it might not be vampires, it can always be something else. Same with Oni. Oni don't necessarily mean spirit monsters, it could be just a werewolf or a beast.
But yeah, in regards to this clan of wolves, the hunters don't trust them, but they also can't really do anything about them because the shogun is flat out just keeping anyone from investigating them.
Iemitsu really likes them.
Yep.
1,000 strange accidents seem to take place within inside of this clan.
Which is why it's pretty likely they have mage blood, or a mage is among
some
them.
sort of mage thing. But yeah.
Or even worse, or possibly darker.
Oh yeah, it could be worse. Could be just spirit.
Kappa are fun
playing.
though. They go into Kappa, which I like. Here we go.
Yep. They share a number of traits. They are frog-like. They have a beak. Plate at the top of their skulls. They must always be wet, but they don't.
And no one can agree on anything else. That's the thing. The Kappa is one of those weird yokai where, depending on where you are in Japan, there might be a completely different rule about it. Some don't like cucumbers. Some love cucumbers. Some, if you bow to them, they'll murder you. Some, if you bow to them, they'll bow as well. And then
Which is how
all the water drains out. Yes. So it all depends on region from region what they actually are and how they actually do.
Also, I think there's appearances too. Like some are larger and hairier.
Yeah, some have hair, some don't. Some are more frog-like, some are more turtle-like.
Which is why this one hunter, Yamato, essentially came up with the theory that the Kappa is more of a guise than an actual thing, to where it's something a supernatural creature puts on.
Then there's a specific type of fae.
That's also true.
Here's
another thing is that the Kappa,
because fae, the way they operate is based on human belief.
Yes.
So
it's also
if
important
you change the rules, or if the rules are different, it might be the same entity, but the game they play will be different.
Yeah, that's why it's a guise. It's a disguise.
Yeah. Which is also important to note with how sometimes these Kappa operate. There's some Kappa that just drink your blood or try to drown you. There's others that try to reach up your ass and like steal your life force.
Yeah. And then there's just some that rob you.
Yeah, and then there's like some like the fucking fish from the skin changers.
You know, actually, imagine that being a thing. Like you're just going on a samurai quest, and then all of a sudden, this big fish is like, "Oi,
oi." You can throw that. That is a creature you can throw anywhere.
Also, they are hilariously less of a problem in the rural areas because they don't like to inhabit clean water. They like to inhabit murky water.
Right.
Well, yeah, they can't be seen, which is another reason I think they might be fae-based, actually.
Mm-hmm. And then we've got Oni, immortalized with the most famous Oni, Shuten Doji. If you know anything about Japanese monsters, you know who the Oni are.
Yep.
Yeah. Shuten Doji is defeated by Minamoto Yorimitsu.
The father of all samurai, because Minamoto himself, I believe, also was also one of the main factions in the Genpei War. He led one of them.
Yes. And
the Genpei War is so mythologized, it's ridiculous.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Of course, there's tales of what happens after, which is where the question comes. Some say that Shuten Doji's head is buried away from the capital. Others say it's at the mountain still. Some say that Shuten Doji became a god.
Yeah, because he repented because of Minamoto kicking his ass.
But the hunters know different stories.
The hunters say that Shuten Doji made a community of Oni that they abducted that may be vampires.
Which is not an unheard of thing, considering some parts of the story do claim that there were other Onis that worked under him.
Yeah, they mentioned there's a transformative element about Shuten Doji because something came for the child that would later become him. Starving King of Nightmares that would pass on a curse.
Mm-hmm.
So you can do whatever the hell you want with Shuten Doji. This is another thing where it's like...
A fun idea could be he's a very powerful Nosferatu.
Or
though most agree that he's probably dead. That at least he is probably dead.
Like the Oni are actually a bloodline of Nosferatu.
Actually,
that
Deva.
can appear in the
or Deva.
That
because if you take a look through where they're taking, like when they talk about it, as Oni is starving through the night, where's the task on a jurisdiction, terrified of the changes that have taken place, Shuten Doji did then what anyone else would do. They created a community. There are very few that believe their progeny, however, a different question entirely. The mountain remains a hotly contested bastion of supernatural activity, and it has been since the first emergence of the Shuten Doji.
The speed. That's why.
Yes, the speed and the strength is very Deva-like.
Mm-hmm. At the same time, we've seen with New World that sometimes bloodlines can almost merge, it seems.
Yeah,
well,
this could be a
weird vampires that form. Like we did Night Horrors, which talked about weird vampire strains. Like, how we had the hopping ghosts, the ghouls, the fat vampires. This could just be a Japanese special.
Mm-hmm. And hell, from if you really want to make him dangerous, they may not even have the same problems with light, considering it's never actually been mentioned if they have problems with the daylight.
So that's
very
the thing.
dangerous.
They could be related to vampires, but their requirements are different. Maybe they're more like the Nagaraja of Old World, where they need human flesh instead. And perhaps they have different weaknesses. Like maybe in one case, they can't resist alcohol. Like if they're offered it, they have to drink it.
Like, well, you also got to remember, New World is a lot more flexible when it comes to other supernatural stuff than Old World. Yeah, in Old World, everything has to fit within the bounds somehow.
Or
New World, there's a lot of just stuff. There's a lot of stuff that's just throw your hands in the air.
In Old World, there's a meta plot that you kind of have to follow. Like, for example, you can't run like normal vampire clans in Asia because of the Quasian and all the meta plot that surrounds that. But in New World, you just shrug your hands and go, "Fuck it, I do what I want." If you want Onis to actually exist as their own thing, sure. If you want them to be Deva, sure. Do you want them to just be a weird, funny haha myth that's like led by Prometheans or something? Sure.
Spirits.
Do you want the murder fish to be in here? Sure, you can do it.
Murderfish can go in almost any setting ever. I stand by that. Like, along with the spider canoe.
The Rokurokubi.
Yes, these are one of
the head woman. The woman who gave the woman with very weird heads.
Now there's two different versions of these, which is one is a lot like the classic Pangolin of Southeast Asian mythology.
Yeah, the Penangan.
And the other one is more like a pangolin, but the neck just stretches out.
Well, there's one where their head detaches, and then there's
I said Duhan. That's why I gave them the epithet of Duhan.
So they're not traditionally evil, but they do need to drain blood. And there's rumors that there's an entire village of them somewhere near Mount Yoshino. So that is a thing. And there is some truth to this to a degree. There's marks on the neck, although the way the legends work the way.
These damsels are frequently said to carry teeth marks on their throats and their wrists.
Could this be a vampire bloodline?
And reports state that these women are never found in the company of men and are often armed.
Also, they lack things like wells or agriculture.
Yeah, like that's the thing.
There's a lot of vampire line. It would make sense because of the lack of agriculture.
But it could be changelings.
It could be changelings. I was actually going to say because of if they didn't do the lack of agriculture, I would have had them be a ghoul community.
Ooh, that could also be a good one.
Like a society of women warrior ghoul community.
I would have actually said demon.
Demon's also a good choice.
A shoddy cover. But I would have went with ghoul community because that's, I think, a little more interesting, and they haven't done that yet.
Yep, and then up next is our list of the compacts.
Because you're in a different time period, and these are the ones we talked about. Here's the Amasan. These are the, pearl divers.
Yep.
And to an unofficial degree, sea beast killers.
Yeah. There are kind of when you scroll down, there's a lot of talk about like, oh, here's all the hunters and all that, but
no, they go into details about what they do. Amasan, they're hunters, but their main job and the one they make their money on is they hunt pearls. Well, they not only do that, but they hunt pearls, catching enemies because they were used in certain dishes. Seaweed for platters, seaweed being a very popular additive to soups. Octopi for food, and other sea-dwelling creatures. Basically, they were fishermen.
Yep.
They just happened to make extra money on the side whenever they found pearls. They're pretty damn good at their job. They're able to hold their breath quite a while. And
they all carry knives. And they all carry
for a reason.
I mean, ostensibly, it's to crack open those things to get the pearls,
or to scare off sharks.
They're also there to drive deep into sea beast necks.
Yeah, there's a variety of sea monsters.
And, well, as they mentioned women, it's not while the actual diving, you can be a man a part of this, but you're not a diver. You'll probably be one of the other duties.
Yep, and it's just details about them. Here's their duties. They deep dive. There's also the callers.
It's the duties are the equivalent of like the different roles. The deep divers, they're the ones that dive really deep. The callers are the ones that almost that kind of like
Scouts.
The people who watch them, the watchers, they watch and make sure, things coming. And the Okas, the mothers, they're the hard combat people. They're the ones that, well, the divers go for the pearls, the callers, are watching. The Okas, when the monster moves in, they go in and, stab it in the back of the neck.
Starfs, hope you brought from some sweet potatoes. No. Hide in shame. But yeah, they're not very high. They're not very high in popularity or like relevant. Well, they're not high on the social ladder because they're fishermen.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I know why you said that, because Okasan is also sometimes used as like the name for a madam at a brothel.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, because it means mother.
Yeah, so you're just calling her mommy Dom. Anyway, here's the level of influences that
God.
you have.
They come in 3 degrees.
Oh, they actually did stereotypes. They sometimes forget about these.
Yes, this is essentially, if you remember a compact, this is part of Hunter thing. They give you a bit of a boost. So in this case, it's you get extra.
No, Tech. I'm looking at the stereotypes. This is the first book that actually did this. I always loved when books do this. So these are what the Amasan believe on the other guys. For the hunting maidens, I once worked with one who supported my hunt from afar. Never was there a more useful ally outside my sisters. For the Bijin, they turn their noses up at us as their skin is battered by salt. When the great things from the death threatens Tokyo, they know their folly.
Oh shit, can we fight Godzilla?
That's a viable monster, because that's a deviant.
A bit out of the depth, though, literally.
No, come on.
A bunch of old women with knives.
End of the campaign, you fight Godzilla.
Yeah.
A bunch of old women with knives having to fight Godzilla sounds amazing.
They don't have a high opinion of the Hotsuku.
Well, yeah, because
they don't
merchants.
Like them. No one does.
They're merchants, dude.
And then the Oto. They're strong, but they don't like the water. Why?
Because they're... because aren't dampers are a thing. That's a thing. And only, because of the shooting... Oh. They are dampers. Since they're heavily hinted to be Deva, and that's a thing, have vampires do exist.
They hate water. Also, it could just be if the Onis are even if they're not full on undead, they might still just do the undead sink thing.
That too, but it also might be a case of, because if you have because half vampires are a thing, and sometimes you do inherit some of the negative flaws from their undead half.
Yeah, mm-hmm. I actually like this one because they basically go with the bow shaman woman. They mentioned that basically anyone who would be using religious stuff with a bow could become one.
Yep.
I was gonna say, should we at least go over what the pips do before we move on? Because we can skip that.
Not really. This is
mechanical. Because of the influence, basically, it allows you to do certain favors.
Yeah, it just adds extra stuff.
It's nice fluff, but So the Asusa Miko. Basically, during this period, it was very difficult to be a Shinto priestess because they're codifying all those folk religions. Basically, the deity the local deity you might pursue might be forcibly integrated into a larger, more well-known one.
Or your local shrine is not exactly popular anymore.
Or even something worse, movements. Or worse, maybe your local deity is classified as a monster.
It happens, but not often. Or alternatively, just straight up, you're losing relevance due to the popularity of Buddhism. And this was happening quite a bit. And these ladies, the original organization was founded by displaced Shinto priestesses.
I was actually going to say, in the enemy, they actually do mention the idea that some of the things they were treating with were monsters. But now Japan, the imbalance left many young Miko vulnerable to possession by gods, monsters, and demons. As a result, there were corruption within many of these families. And when they traveled between the shrines, doing their sacred dances, the monsters went with them, feeding on, both literally and figuratively, those they protected.
These formed because of the Sengoku Jidai, a lot of monsters kind of, because spirits play on bad times, especially.
Yeah.
They formed during the Jidai, the Sengoku period, because, well, a lot of them got possessed. A lot of death does that. And they were out quite a bit during those times, attending to the dead and getting rid of the impurity. And nowadays, they're out hunting spirits primarily still.
And monsters in general, looking for those that are influencing other practitioners of various faiths, like possessed monks, possessed priests, possessed missionaries, whatever else they might look for them.
Weird cults led by the hungry dead.
Yeah, all of that, very viable. Now, it's also important to note that you could actually, I like one of the last descriptions of a hunter here, which is technically you're not one of these Mikos, but you were married to one, and your traditions were similar enough that you were able to basically do what she did to avenge them.
Also, unlike nuns, Miko can marry.
Yes, as I mentioned, this is one of the reasons why Japanese nuns and various popular media are kind of weird. If you've been raised in the West, how they treat priests and nuns is oftentimes like, what are you talking? This doesn't make sense.
There's a reason they're used so often in their anime for exotic, weird religions.
Yes,
also Japanese Christianity is really different because it had to go underground for a long time.
Remember, Jesus, Isakuri stuff and all that is partially related to underground worship.
But yeah, essentially, you might not be a Miko, you could be a hunter, or you could actually be another group. Like warrior monks are often absorbed by them. Like orders of warrior monks that focused on hunting monsters might be absorbed by this compact.
Mm-hmm. And each of these people
these are the most noted.
And each of these people have different duties. The traditional Miko, who they say they speak the weird gibberish that lets them talk with the dead.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Then there's the go-betweeners. These are the people that are able to kind of more look for problems, like, oh yeah, this place has got the bad juju.
Well, the first one's more they translate, and they're also assessing to make sure that the person that enters the trance doesn't become possessed.
Then there are the rabbi, who, like I said, they're looking for things that cannot be seen.
Yeah, these are mediums.
Those would be the demon hunter ladies you'd see in actually, because we're talking about Miko, I can unironically talk about Inuyasha slightly.
Oh boy.
Well, a little bit, because that's why both Kagome and I forget the name of the one she's the reincarnation of both used it. Kikyo. That's why they both used bows. And that's why they fought spirits and shit.
And then there's just Geiki, which is literally the role of the male shaman, because sometimes there's some specific creatures that have a preference for women.
And on top of that, the Geiki are they serve many of the same functions, but certain monsters can only be beaten by a man or by a woman.
Yeah. Like I said, they have preferences for women. So it's good to have
sometimes there's a rampaging fox spirit, and it's just nice to have a big burly guy that can pin that thing down for you to do the exorcism.
So these guys are mostly out in the boonies, but they also can be found in Edo. But their primary thing is they work around the rural shrines, just trying to take care of these things that go bump in the night that fuck up the farmer communities.
Anyway, they have high opinion of the Amasan.
It's also important to note that with this, it's quite interesting, is that you get the medium merit for free when you join this compact.
Yeah.
So they are legit. These are actually people who can talk with spirits.
The Jesus.
Imsit,
basically, there's a weird Japanese cult that. Oh, not Japanese cult. Basically, Japanese Christianity posits that Jesus actually went beyond when he came back from the dead. He settled in Japan.
Might have settled in Japan. There's a sect that believes that, technically speaking, he swapped places at the moment of death with his half brother in Japan, and then came to Japan. It's not really a sect; it's more like a small cult, but it's kind of weird.
So anyway, the Amazon, they're well connected. On the Bijin, they do good work, but their work is full of distraction. They can never be as devoted as we. Basically, fuck you, artists.
Yeah, you're bitches. And then they kind of understand that our time is kind of numbered, and the merchants are going to outcompete us eventually.
Because
they at least approve that the work is being done, even if they don't like the method.
And they fucking
and then
hate
they
the
they think that the Toto are like awful.
No,
and
they're
then
monsters. They're monsters, and the only reason they're not being killed is because we need them.
Yeah, and then we get this anime pretty boy with bloody hands and a paintbrush.
It tells you what they're about.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
It's pretty emblematic.
The enemy for the. Let's move into like we kind of went over who these are, but who do they deal with?
So the Bijin formed from the artist caste. Their first cell actually formed in Edo, because the world they work in, the floating world, Ukiyo, it is where societal norms break down, and that is very beneficial to the things that bump in the night.
So their mission is not even to hunt, but to figure out who is who.
Not only figure out who is who, but depending on
who's dangerous,
scare off the beasts if they're fucking with our patrons.
Classify, analyze, and test. Define, destroy the dangerous. Use the useful. That's literally as they put it.
Yeah, like here's an example. A Deva can be one of the ones that must be destroyed. If they cause a lot of trouble, like they tend to focus on specific actors or actresses or artists and they abduct them, yeah, you got to get rid of them. But the one that just kind of shows up and occasionally asks for a weird drink request and just pays perfectly good yen. They didn't use yen. I forget the term of what the old Meowth coin. You know that weird the weird coin on Meowth's
the Koku or whatever.
The Koku, yeah. Like if his money's good, who cares?
Then on top of that, you get the fact that one of the descriptions here is literally a innkeeper who occasionally lets like the vampires and the other monsters deal with their problem clients. Like they've made a deal with them.
Is that the first result?
The third, the last one there.
After your mother died under questionable circumstance, you took ownership of the tea house. You're a little young, but you've learned your mother's savvy and fierce protective streak. The dancer women and geisha men who entertain here aren't your stock, they're your responsibility. And you've made arrangements with the monsters you've caught stalking the place. They can eat and feed from only those you approve from, people who don't pay their debts or are otherwise disgusting, and you won't cause any trouble. So yeah, these are the info brokers.
To some degree, these are info brokers, espionage people, and they're everywhere.
I'd say the thing they're kind of closest to, you can call them the Union, but they also kind of remind me of
Vascu. No, I'm actually close.
They remind me a bit of Vascu, where they're kind of they're not a government organization, but their whole thing is assessing the monster situation.
You're a monster, but man, can you throw a party faction?
Ashwood Abbey.
No, that's not Ashwood Abbey. No.
Ashwood Abbey is some of that way.
No, Ashwood Abbey, like, I like them, but they're monsters.
Oh yeah, they're trash. But the duties they have are the Ninki. None of this works unless there's a party. The Ninki is expected to eat, drink, and arrange the parties. They're the party festival guys.
They're the faces. In
the geisha, those are the performers, illustrators, and novelists. Then there's the aware.
The academics, the geisha, the academics,
and
these guys, they're more scholars too. But they're all, since they kind of have to get out a bit more, they're also hilariously a bit more out there.
The aware are traditionally the more active hunters. They're the ones that are much more likely to kill, and they play differently. They're not direct combat like the Miko or the what was it, the Amazons?
Yeah. They're not out there to stab you. They're out there to
they use chicanery, trickery, and traps to beat you.
I unironically could see to where essentially, due to like a web of deceit and treachery, they essentially trap a. Let's just go with a really particularly nasty changeling, because they're not all sympathetic victims.
Oh no!
Traps them in a situation to where they can't leave the scenario without offending a samurai's honor, and when he slaps them, it breaks their cover, and the samurai kill the monster.
I'm just envisioning a very fun character you could do based on the Bijin is just you go full ham kabuki actor who's an aware, like their whole function is to study other monsters, but they play the idiot full as they do it.
I also love the level 5, which is literally you're going to be at least somewhat famous in the history books due to a wood carving.
So we are going over the statuses because you said
we mostly aren't, dude. It's fine.
We mostly aren't. It's just the ones that really stand out. Like, oh yeah, that, and the number 5 here is just kind of interesting.
Yeah, you'll be remembered forever.
Some way.
Even if your name isn't.
They don't have a particularly high opinion of the Pearl Girls.
They don't really like the Mikos.
We understand being tossed aside by the nobility, yet used when it suits their fancy.
They don't really like our clever merchant boys. And
they respect
They know the devil's better than we ever will, which is not a compliment, but not an insult.
And here are our clever merchant boys.
There's the happy merchant.
Merchants who steal the otherworldly.
Yep, their literally goal is to rob the fucking ghosts.
His trick literally stole a merchant by the name of, this is the perfect thing. A merchant by the name of Inyo developed a signature skill for the network. A trick, a tool they can use to equalize the field and remove the major advantages monsters possessed. Because the whole thing they got into why this is because they got upset that the monsters were stacking the game against them.
Yes.
His trick literally stole supernatural powers from the monsters that stood in their way. He quickly taught many merchants this trick with an agreement that he'd receive a cut of all their future earnings. Some quibbled, but they jumped aboard it. He called them his students, and he created the Hotekazu.
So basically, they acquire the techniques of monsters
through money
to fight monsters and get more money.
Fight is a strong word.
You're stealing the dark gifts of a yokai.
They compete. Actually, I think it's more accurate to say they compete with the monsters.
Well, here's the thing. Yeah. Before Inoue, the Hototogetsu kind of existed since around the time of the Mongol invasion. But they were a class of poor merchants, a small group of merchants that dealt primarily in folk remedies. They genuinely had some mystical talent or understanding, but for the most part, they sold hokum. And it wasn't until Inoue that they became more, and it's mainly because especially vampires were starting to fuck them over.
Yeah.
But not by murdering them, but you
by
understand.
Financially destroying them over.
But not just edging them out of the market.
Yeah.
Their whole thing, as I mentioned, they're not hunters in the traditional sense. They're not there to fight. They're there to compete.
They're there to steal all your money. They're there to steal your wallet through legal
means. They
will mug
really
your supernatural powers.
They don't really maybe obviously every individual person has their own thing, but the organization as a whole doesn't really care if a vampire kills people. They care if it impacts the bottom line in some way.
So one of the funniest things is because of Inouye's tactics, they essentially they work like demons. They're human demons, actually, where they slowly fuck over the monster's economic prowess and abilities, and then slowly financially steal their powers until they're forced to work under them. They work like demons. They basically use contracts like demons to fuck them
they
over.
even mentioned this in the original 2e book for Vampire when they're talking about the Zaibatsus of Tokyo, which is that they will literally steal the powers away from vampires that are causing trouble.
Yep. So let's see. You're a merchant. Your father was a merchant. Blah blah blah. You're not deeply invested in stealing the dark gifts, but you're very pragmatic. Blah blah blah.
It's a useful tool.
Selling silks is the mean to an end. Vampire seduced your father away from your mother. You found the vampire captivating. Swore one day you'd have that power over men.
And now you're stealing that power.
And the other one is a samurai who joined purely for power.
And on top of that, expected to commit seppuku, your response is, lol, no.
No. And unlike the others, they don't have roles, they have factions, because this is a full-on conspiracy.
Yeah. Organizers, they don't buy or sell directly, they facilitate trade. They find a niche and a need, and they dispatch the merchants to fill the need.
They're the market researcher guys. They're the ones that are there is a market for our folk remedy here. And here are some otherworldly spooks that we could potentially bribe into fighting these other fucking spooks.
Also, they're not leaders, so to say, but the others go to them because they know their things.
Yes, merchants are, of course.
They're these are the people on the ground.
Yeah, merchants are your hustlers. They're the ones selling the field, trading their powers around, and making deals with monsters to some degree.
Not only making deals with monsters, but they because again, this is kind of a second thing they do. they sell actual product, but they also have to do with the the footwork.
Also, supernatural power. Diplomats. These guys are actually the most of the face.
Yeah, they'll try to bring new franchises into the fold because new establishments.
I wouldn't call them diplomats. I would have called them negotiators, because their whole thing is they are brought on, especially with monsters.
Yeah, the fun thing about the Seto endowment is it allows you to steal the dread powers that a monster might have, and then use those powers against those monsters. So, like, for example, these guys, if you're looking at, say, fighting a group of Nosferatu, you can steal Nightmare from them.
And make them
and then use that against them. Yes. Or their strength. And then suddenly this poor little merchant that they're oppressing picks up a fire poker.
A cart
and smashes it over them. Yeah.
Also, as a funny little thing I noticed, obviously none of these factions are particularly combat thing, but hilariously, unlike all the others, it's not the bottom one that's the most closest to combat. It's probably the second.
First. Oh, maybe they are stigmatics. Or maybe Inoue was a stigmatic.
Or you possibly that figured out how to use the God Machine like a God Machine exploit. There's a lot,
but it's all deep cover by this point.
Well, by this point, only Inoue knows, and that secret goes with his death.
He'll be dead for one reason or another.
So
I guess then these guys have stereotypes for the other conspiracies. They don't like, I guess, but they consider them useful customers.
They're weirdos who have weird tastes. They're good money though.
Yeah.
They understand. They have no respect for the Omna, but they are a resource to use.
In this case, they're interesting, but but the monsters they fight, not good for business. There's nothing worth it.
Also, they don't like the Miko because, well,
the Miko are you guys are kind of assholes
because they don't like us.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. They're pretty good with the Bijin. They just think they're waste. They just think they're waste of space.
No, the Bijin, they basically they're good craftsmen, but they think they're more useful to let them do their own thing.
And then they basically say that we're going to steal everything from the Ototo that we can.
Yep. Actually, no. What they're saying is they're not worth. We can do it better, so there's no point in stealing from them.
True.
So instead, that actually gives them that makes them great allies.
But they're ineffective otherwise.
Well, yeah.
And
that means they're best working for us.
And then you get the Ototo, who is like, "Oh yeah, you fucked a monster. Congratulations."
You didn't fuck a monster. It's not even your dad. It's probably your great something or other.
So they mention like all the kinds of yokai. They also mention that they hunt changelings quite a bit. But they might also side with them.
The yokai blooded.
Yokai blooded.
Are we moving on to that? Because up next is Ototo.
Mm-hmm.
You didn't specify.
Yeah. Sorry.
Yep. Yeah, here you go. The Ototo, demon blooded. I like the slight nod to the giving the Oni the club makes them unstoppable there.
Yep, they even mention that on the next page. They talk about.
But yeah, if there's one thing, the enemies of the Ototo are most. You mentioned Changeling, but no, their greatest enemy are other Oni.
Namely beasts.
Some of them are met with scorn, disdain, birthing children, this blood diluted. So this was remember, this is when Beast was still being pushed. This is a Beast bloodline.
Somewhat.
Sort of.
But not as shit.
No, they go in, they talk about how like they use their blood to fight the Oni and all the enemy. But the most important thing they talk about is sometimes the Otome encounter the Otode encounter a truly legendary monster. Like the great dragons, Kirin, and Phoenixes look like men, but their souls quake with a primordial terror. They respect these beasts, but believe they came into existence flawed and broken. By their very natures, these monsters attract would-be heroes out to slay them. While noble in purpose, these hunters waylay to the innocent people in their path. These hunters are a symptom, the monsters are the disease. Kill the monster, cure the symptom.
That makes Ototo better?
Ototo are already better than basically anything in Beast.
Mm-hmm. Also, the art's a lot better than anything in Beast.
It's even not like great art. It's just it's okay.
Better. I said it's better. I didn't say it was amazing.
Yeah.
So
but they go
these guys take on changelings and spirits. And
also, thing with the Ototo, you're like as much as you might want to be like the thing. No, the Ototo are clans typically because mentioned you're raised in a house full of Ototo.
Yeah,
it's a family.
It's a bloodline.
And more than likely, it's not going to be one of those things like, oh, once in a generation. No, it's a pretty
most
common.
Most are cursed, and on top of that, you got to keep in mind, while it gives you great power, they see themselves as basically still paying off this karmic imbalance that their ancestors fucked over by doing what they did.
Also, remember,
they hate this
the Japanese have a very strong idea of purity. You are the definition of impure.
They hate this.
Yeah. Let's also note that the name Ototo is one of just several different readings of the character that makes up their name, which takes 84 strokes. It is one of the most complicated kanji out there.
Mm-hmm. And of course, the Iron Club, which is right next to the Kana.
They mention the stats for it: 2 damage, 9 again, size 3 with a -2 initiative, 3 strength, 2 hands. That's not bad.
And it does stun. It also has stun.
It also has stun. And if it's
when it causes
aggravate
iron, because it has pure iron, it does aggravated wounds to changelings,
which is pretty good.
Mm-hmm. 9 again is always nice.
9 again is always nice. 2 damage flat, not the greatest, but you're gonna get 3 strength off of that anyway, so you're already rolling basically 5 damage. It's okay. It's pretty good.
The Lonesome Road, they rarely settle.
But they don't work. Despite the fact that they grow up together, they don't really work together.
They're rarely Ototo exclusive cells. They often will find another group and add into them. It's kind of a tragic existence. It kind of sucks. And integrity is vital to them.
They have to
actually
keep
just
track
noticed
of
they don't
have
have unlike all the others, they don't have any factions or anything else you can call them.
Well, because it's more that they're a bloodline rather than an organized group.
I know. I'm just pointing that out.
Also, they have to keep track of their family because anyone who have their impurity curse.
And I'm gonna mention this because it's important. The Otore are supernatural. You're gonna live even the lowest Otore is gonna live 2 to 3 times longer than any other human.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You're
unnatural.
Which hilariously means if you want to play a decently high hunter game, you could have an Otode from this era be in Modern Knights.
Why are you calling it
if they have 5 hits? I'm just pronouncing it weird. I'm sorry. Ototo. I'm just pronouncing it weird. You could have one of the characters from this timeline appear in Modern Knights.
Oh yeah, if you have the rank 5.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. It's also important to note that you get unseen for everything. Anything inhuman, you automatically know it is inhuman by being around it, which is also really kind of cool.
The Otode love the... you have me doing it. Whoops. The Ototo actually respect the Anasan because they do the same function.
Yes. Mm-hmm. They respect the Mikos.
Yeah, they
actually.
Do.
They're wary of their own kind. They understand it.
Yeah, because the Ototo know that, especially since not all Ototo follow this righteous path. This is the reason they kill changelings so often.
Yeah.
They respect changelings who actually fight the threat of, not their other kind, but like of the gentry and shit. They respect those that actually take up the arms against that shit.
Everyone else is a pansy.
Everyone else is a pansy who's just exploiting their powers for profit and should just be fucking killed.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, basically consider these guys demon samurai almost.
Speaking of extorting power, they don't actually think that badly of the merchants.
Oh no, they find them very efficient.
Yeah, the happy merchants are actually one of their people.
They actually have a very low. Unsurprisingly, they have a very low opinion of the Malus.
I can see why.
Yeah, their methods don't work here.
Yeah, they're Puritan witch hunters in a world where that doesn't work.
And not only that, but you can piss off some very powerful spirits like Kirin.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Or even the other hunters.
Yeah.
Yeah. They then go into mechanics, which I think is kind of nice. So Seto basically allows you to do a bunch of different things.
Steal stuff.
They actually take their name from a breed of cuckoo bird, which is why they
requires the stealing. And ignoring the dots and things. For example, a character with 4 dots in this can steal a 4-dot power, 1 3-dot powers, and 2, etc. Yeah, like it has to match the same level.
Yeah, it's kind of nice. And then they have a bunch of different gifts they can grab over time, at the cost of risking integrity.
Well, because I was going to say something to note is that each dot of Seto allows you to steal one of those disciplines, gifts, spells, contracts, or transmutations if you're fighting Promethean. Basically, the special power.
However, you've got to be smart because you can't just yank it. You have to trick the creature.
Well, first off, you have to know that they have it. You have to have seen it, know it.
You have to use
or have figured out or learned about it through information.
Then you have to con them.
And then you take it away from them, and you can use it to kill them, which is very fitting. You're having to play a bit of a trickster, and also it means that, remember this, if the person, I would say that as a GM, if the monster that you stole the power from dies, you lose the power.
Oh, actually, this gives me a really stupid, funny idea, though, of like a one-shot setting moment.
Really?
Hodogetsu gets into a contract negotiation with a demon. Who fucking cons out who first?
Exactly.
Come on, don't you want to see that?
What if the answer is both?
That's actually the funny idea. Like, what happens is they both get what they want. The demon gets a part-time share on the guy's identity, but the guy gets
someone that they know.
Someone they know, because they're not going to get that. Some guy they know.
And our merchant friend gets a ability to always know if someone's lying or something like that.
Yeah, it's a hilarious contract, but like the gag is the demon loses a little more.
And then we go over the Otoro's gifts.
Yes, the Otoro's gifts are literally you get superpowers.
6 hours. You have to however, at any time you have Otoro can meditate for 6 hours to replace their gifts.
Yes.
However, this causes lethal damage to them, so because
they're
literally they're essentially flaring up fire in their blood.
Yeah, some of these are like the classic shape-shifting. Some of these are I can see spirits and grab them and do things to them. I can I can craft a bane for a demon or a spirit.
Allows you to see them. Jibaku allows you to control weak-willed. Kaibutsu,
one allows you
to become a monster.
It lets you become the only girl they shot with love. And speaking of that, I look at him. It's a big skeleton.
It's
a big skeleton.
It's
and he's got like
skeleton, man.
It's Tanaya's skeleton about to be smacked the fuck up by a guy who's just drawn like a symbol on his forehead.
I love it.
That's kind of great art.
I love it.
Also, humans have to make resolve composure checks not to crap their pants looking at
you. It's a lot like it's basically a discount werewolf warform.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, discount in the sense that you also don't have to deal with. Well, I'd say it's an advantage because you don't have to deal with werewolf bullshit.
So they could be Dampier, but it's also possible they're wolf-blooded that went funny.
It's also interesting that you can reverse that change at any time in the scene or till the end of the scene. So you're just kind of rampaging monster. Kind of fun.
Kenshi is the ban.
Kenshi's the ban.
That's what he's doing right
burning
there.
emblem that punishes demons.
Yes. Then there's the Shinigami Buki, which allows you to devour souls.
And what that does is, for a number of turns, your character moves 1 build point against. Well, it just lets you just kill things, like even things that you really reasonably shouldn't be able to.
Is that you? No, it's an Oni. Can't you see? It's an Oni.
Yeah, against spirits and demons and all this other shit, it causes vampires. A point of lethal damage a turn.
Special technique.
Also, if you do this, if you're an asshole, you can do this to a mortal to turn them into essentially a slave.
The soulless condition and a thrall. Kind of neat. Like if you need to create a suicide bomber, basically.
I hope unless that person was the literal worst, and even if they're the worst, the storyteller should probably make you do checks for your humanity.
Well,
you're making an integrity check. No doubt on that.
You get hot-blooded.
Yeah, hot-blooded, which I love.
You throw fire.
You can throw the fire axe weapon with a damage rating of 1 less than your character's dots. Using a weapon, it replaces the weapon's damage rating. It can be thrown at a range of 5, 10 to 15 yards, the dexterity plus athletics. So you can literally throw fireballs at people.
So here's the storytelling in this period.
Find anchor points. They have a bunch of media that they recommend, all of which is good.
To read, yes.
Samurai Champloo, Ninja Scroll.
Miyamoto Musashi.
Of course.
Hidden Fortress,
which would become
Lone
one
Wolf
of the
and Cub is a good pick.
Yes, Hanzo the Razor.
47 Ronin, set after the period, but it deals with a lot of the same kind of issues with the samurai.
The 47 Ronin were the Ronin who their master was killed, so they go in and murder the shit out of the guy.
This is one of the... I mean, it technically does happen during the era, just like 100 years after at this point.
Yes, it's a very famous example of it.
Hey, you know anime better. What's the one where a dude is killing other demons to reclaim parts of his body because he was cut apart into like 47 different pieces or something? Basically, they made a pact with a demon to save his life as a baby, and now he's out killing the monsters to regain parts of his body back.
That actually sounds very... That does sound familiar. I'm not 100%...
that would be an interesting Otodo run, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Aspirations, of course, they mention is like just reward players for cultural expression, basically. Play along with what's going on there.
Dororo.
Thank you, Dororo.
Dororo.
So Hunters like Delta Green, but you kill your more traditional monsters instead of Cthulhu. That's cool. Yeah, Star Asp. It's straight up that.
Yeah, that's what Hunter is.
And it runs the gamut. Like you could totally play Bubba J with a shotgun fighting like the fucking pixies that steal his weed. You could go full white trash with it, or you can go full Men in Black by playing Vascu or Task Force Valkyrie, depending on what flavor of murder/investigation you want to do.
You can also run it like we have to fight the Hopskinsville goblins who keep coming to steal our fucking moonshine.
Or you could play Or you can play 4chan versus the monster world by playing Network Zero.
Yeah.
Scooby-Doo Gang as well. That's
also very, very true.
But yeah, also this is a thing because I remember reading some stuff. A main difference between Hunter the Vigil and other thing, and it's the thing Hunter the Reckoning, is that Vigil runs the gambit between normal humans, like if we saw before, and the more supernatural base with its powers.
So, like,
the thing is, you have a gambit. You don't have to do it. Where in Reckoning, you just flat are.
So
Reckoning has a weird problem where all the hunters are really written to be fucking terrorists. Like not like you're freedom fighters or like full on like to fight, to kill these vampires, I'm going to take an innocent person and strap a suicide vest to them and not tell them this and tell them to walk into their headquarters and blow them up. That's an acceptable tactic in the Hunter Reckoning world.
Yeah.
That said, you might get also in Hunter the Vigil, depending on your group, like the Cainite Conspiracy definitely would be willing to suicide bomb a vampire lair. Because they're all former ghouls or people that have been affected by ghouls in some way.
I wonder if I can comment on the different power levels, because I've been trying to do that for the past minute.
Sorry.
So yeah, like what Greg said, Reckoning, everyone tends to have some form of power. It's also very strongly Western theology inspired divine power. You're powered by God, effectively.
Yeah, it was a companion series to Demon the Descent.
Which, that kind of sucked, because Hunters were described as early as the first edition of Vampire.
Yeah, Hunters Hunted is a much better book.
It's so
honestly.
much better. But it doesn't matter, because Old World Hunter sucks complete fucking ass compared to New World, in my opinion. Because New World, you have a variety of powers. You can go the solo independent hunters, which we described very briefly. Compacts, which are much less strong, and that usually just gives you certain favors. So it kind of gauges your power level a little bit. Like, you can start just simply as Bubba J, and you just shoot the goblins in your cornfield. But you could eventually join, say, a compact which specializes in hunting changelings, because you find out, goblins are real, motherfucker. The doctor wasn't lying to you, dude. No, the doctor was lying to you, dude. You were right. Goblins are real.
You don't have to take the meds.
And then eventually, like, you manage to join the conspiracy that the Compact is a subsidiary of, which gives you the magical abilities to instantly smell goblins and like go into the market and fucking steal their tears and then sell them to other goblins.
It's like a bunch of magical moonshine made out of fairy blood that you then use to go and get more fairy blood or something.
Like you could start just completely mundane, hard mode, and then get more and more at the cost of your sanity traditionally.
Yeah, basically the three levels of hunter traditionally are, for at least Vigil, Cell, which is a small group of people who basically like that might be a vampire.
If you've watched Alpha Buse's Hunter the Parenting, it's Hunter the Reckoning, but it still applies. They're technically a cell.
Yeah, they don't have a larger organization they're part of. They don't have any outside resources. It's just you and your friends against whatever the fuck is going bump in the night.
Or, in this case, a family, even.
It's a full family. Grandpa, his two sons, the son's husband, and his grandson. Going off fighting vampires and other things.
Yeah. Then there's the compact level, which is that I've joined a larger organization to access their resources and their knowledge regarding hunters. This might be a national organization.
Like, let's say you do wood blocks. You do paintings, or like you craft puppets for Bunraku Theater.
Or you source them for someone that does that. You might join the Bijin.
You join the Bijin because one of your guests has been terrifying the others with their weirdness, and just occasionally a patron disappears. And you find out that he is a Nosferatu, and well, you don't know what he is. You just know he's an undead monster, and you kill him, but you know there's more based on like some other detecting work.
You start putting out feelers
because that helps you.
Yeah, you put out feelers, and then there's this. Then you find out that there's other owners of inns that know about this, and then they're like, yeah, you're one of us now, and here's your information.
So you go from cowboys to the program with actual pull to put in a DG speak, which is kind of neat.
Yes, this is one of the examples of Task Force Valkyrie. Task Force Valkyrie is basically Delta Green in many ways, except they're more official. So, like, for example,
Vascu is the more Men in Black. You just, like, as long as they don't cause trouble, you leave them alone, sort of thing.
Vascu has psychic powers.
And psychic power assessment too.
The Task Force Valkyrie is just the Delta cool Green. Boys with the cool toys.
Also, the difference between compacts and conspiracies can be a little vague sometimes, because sometimes compacts are more local things, or sometimes they're even nationwide things, or even worldwide things, but they may not hold a lot of power. Well, conspiracies could maybe not even be worldwide, but they hold like special gifts.
The big difference is between a conspiracy and a compact is when you get magical powers.
That's the difference usually. Like, you can have a conspiracy that
only affects the state of Washington.
Yes, or a conspiracy that is global in reach, but literally only affects vampires. Like, their existence is just to kill vampires, like the Cainite heresy.
This conspiracy works in Washington, and it gives you and you take a magical hallucinogenic concoction to gain the strength to punch Bigfoot.
Yeah. It's one of the reasons why, for instance, the Ashton Abbey is, despite the fact that they are essentially literally the 1% and have global influence and reach, they're not a conspiracy purely due to the fact that, first off, they don't give any magic powers besides influence, and second, they are quite literally a club. This is not their day job.
Yeah, like, it's like the Skull. Okay, good point. Like, the Skull and Bones Society is a compact. Yeah. Right, it's a group of people that get together and do something. There's even a compact based around them in one of the books. The idea of a bunch of people that notice that vampires are fucking up cities, so we're going to use our political sway and our financial might to try and fuck with them and compete with them.
A Teamsters union of like auto workers that go after the weird walking automated machine men could be a compact. They specialize in killing demons. Like, this union, this subclass in each auto workers union has branches throughout North America, but they don't have magic powers. They just murder demons.
Yeah, that's all they do. They're really good at it, but they're not going further into,
but they don't have magical powers. You do not get a transforming car robot to punch the demons.
Yeah. And then there's the Lucifers.
If they did get that,
that'd be a conspiracy.
Then they'd be a conspiracy.
Then there's the Luciferge, who are literally 666, because yes, it's 666. Different devil-blooded individuals. There can only be 666 because when one dies, another either discovers they were one all along or is born. It's a little complicated,
or is accepted into the membership. It depends on how you want to flip
it. There's a small number, but they are fucking Satan-blooded.
Yeah, they're basically demon blood, like actual like biblical demons.
Like, not like this devil, like not like the demon, like in the game book, like full on. Oh yeah, Lucifer.
Yeah.
Which is a slight nod to Hunter the Reckoning, because demon in Old World was a lot closer to that.
And for instance, in Demon the Descent, you had the unironic like crossroad demons. You know, the people you bury your thing in a crossroad, and then a mysterious gentleman would come to talk to you.
Well, actually, it'd be Demon the Falling. Demon the Descent is the Matrix.
Oh, yeah, my bad. Oh, yeah, sorry, I get the names mixed up.
Don't worry, Demon the Descent is a lot more popular.
It is for very good reasons.
Yeah.
But anyway, yeah, Anchor Points Media using the future, it's fine.
Yeah, like America Fire, the new
we basically
Regent.
Finished.
And then just a cover. And then a coverage of what else is going on in either Japan and the supernatural world. Vampires are like...
Unsurprisingly, the Nos have a near monopoly on the non-cost.
I was just showing that our next one's going to be a Fae related. So yeah, vampires in Edo are very rife.
Yes. It's one of the most powerful cities for Kindred. It is a highly populated, highly dense urban environment with a lot of feeding opportunities.
I thought God being real was real big in Old World. Kinda, yeah, kinda no. God doesn't work the way he is.
Yeah.
God in Old World is very different than the Christian interpretation.
Yeah, also, as a funny little thing that they actually, I think, hid pretty well, the werewolves aren't so much against the Ainu, it's that they work with the Ainu a lot.
Yeah, they do. They mentioned that a lot of Ainu families have wolf-blooded among them.
Well, the curse really seems to only affect them.
Maybe it's because they're closer to land. Maybe it's because there's just more wolf-blooded among them in the first place.
Also, the Japanese don't seem to have a high opinion of them. As I mentioned, one daimyo house fell because of the scandal.
Yeah. Wolf-blood can turn up in a prominent family, as it does. Sometimes the moon just decides, congratulations, you're a werewolf now. Deal with it, bitch.
But it usually affects the Ainu due to connections, and also I think it has ties because a lot of their spirit deities do take wolf shape.
Yes, there's a very distinct connection with Ainu mythology with wolves.
Even though they were hunted to extinction in Japan ages ago.
Yes.
Also, mages, jokes aside, they're not, for the most part, causing many problems.
Oh no, in fact, actually, they work with the government quite effectively.
They're having a pretty good time, because at the end of the day, mages are still mortal.
Yeah, right now in Edo, there is a hierarch, which is basically the term for the mage that's...
The big cheese.
The big cheese. They're not necessarily like the one that everybody obeys without question, but they're the one that just everybody agrees, this is kind of our de facto leader.
And she currently runs a kabuki theater.
Yeah.
Prometheans
exist. They also mentioned that Pandorans are almost everywhere.
The ceramics, the ceramic doll people
soldiers,
are
yes.
Well, the Pandorans, the reason Pandorans and Ulgan are those rendered by the great Oni that get back up.
Yeah, they're the spirit
Let's say you're a traveler and you're killed by a Kappa. You might stagger back up.
As an Ulgan, which is a hell of an existence, and I would not want to have it.
Now, Pandorans, they picked that because Pandorans are, it's essentially...
Japanese have a weird fascination with dolls. They have a weird fascination with dolls.
Well, not only that, but Pandorans are the result of a failed Promethean, remember?
Yes.
So, and this would explain the malevolent 99-year objects, Tsukugamanoi.
Yes.
Changelings have their own court.
Yep, dedicated to Orihime.
They're friends with they're friends with the merchants in this case. Actually, it seems.
Well, because very profitable goblin. I could see them easily like negotiating in goblin markets quite often.
Yeah,
and well, obviously, with any status quo, the demons are trying to find their own way in it.
Either find or create a status quo.
Beasts are also not uncommon.
Oh, I was gonna say the interesting thing. Some demons have sought out the Otto because they're trying to figure out what exactly they are. Because they don't know.
And
they don't know.
It can reflect on, how it can. Sorry, and also how it can reflect on their own existence and in the way what they can do against the God Machine. Options, man, options.
Also, the beasts are not happy. The beasts are not happy. They're not happy that people are starting to be unafraid.
Happy and not afraid and not awful.
And as for why the Amasan are so noted and why they have a compact, yeah, they fight beasts, because if you're wondering, Makar are the water beasts. They're the ones that like to drown you. They're the horrible... And the thing is, the problem is this is written with the concept that beasts actually do transform into their monstrous form, which they fucking don't.
Yeah,
you're not fighting a real sea monster. You're fighting some fucking teenager
You're fighting
who grows
a dream.
Tentacles.
You're fighting a dream, essentially.
9 times out of 10, yeah, the real monster is a stupid dream. Beast the Primordial is like the worst fucking written thing.
And then there's the sin, and then there are the Sin Eaters.
That's why if you're gonna do beasts, just have them, just replace them with deviants.
Yeah, and Sin Eaters, which are kind of cool.
They have an awkward relationship with the Shrine Maidens.
Yeah, because technically speaking, they shouldn't be alive.
Also, they talk to the dead.
They're impure. We talk to the dead too. They've died. They have Kagare. They have a spirit following them. That's also Kagare. But they do things. They're things too. And traditionally, Sin Eaters don't cause troubles. They actually fix trouble.
Yeah, Sin Eaters 9 times out of 10 are the ones that will go off and deal with a ghost infestation without too much issue. So they are the ones.
The Miko don't like the fact that they're very impure and they see them as not human, but they don't see them as sinister and usually work with them.
Yeah.
And then do you mind if I give the one hint on what the next part is, Adam?
Yeah, I'm just gonna show this photo.
It won't be too bad.
It's pretty obvious.
It won't be bad. Ahem.
Yeah, you wouldn't have guessed that just from looking at that. And that was the Falling Blossom setting of Hunter the Vigil. I would say this is a solid good. It's a very good.
It is good. It's not quite amazing.
I would say it's the best written of the ones we've covered so far.
I think it's the most complete of the one we've read.
That's the reason. So it has the best balance. Like it goes into mechanics. It goes into the relations between compacts and conspiracies.
Yeah. I also say that because unlike in all the other things, like even for Endless World, I always have the question of what are the other people doing. But with this one, I actually don't really have that question as much.
You don't really need to. Like the fact of the matter is that they basically assume. Now, this is both good writing and bad writing. This is why I can't rate it amazing, is because this relies on a lot of legwork of you as a GM to look up yokai and look up a lot of the other stuff in order to have that feeling.
And that is a problem because while they give you hints, they kind of assume that you know, because let's face it, if you play a lot of tabletop games, there's a strong weeb content element to it.
There's a massive weeb community around
overlap.
Games.
I think the term is overlap.
There's strong enough overlap that they kind of assume you know at least enough of the basics to pick it out. Oh, and also I did catch I did catch your comment, Star Asp, on Dororo, where the father was a piece of shit that sold his son's body parts to keep his money.
Yeah. Happy merchant.
Yeah, I think the son's final goal is to kill him when he gets his parts back.
Yeah, there's a lot of definitely a feeling where you can do a lot of different things with this setting, with this time, if you want to do more.
It's good because it gives every creature, even like I think Beast sucks balls, but hey, you can just replace them with deviants.
Also, at least in this case, I'd say that they're not set up as protagonists; they're set up as antagonists.
Yes, they're antagonists, which is what they should be. Because
they're literally
just
monsters in the shadows that look like you.
Like they're even more than the vampires, which I think I have to remind people are always have in every book that even in their own are portrayed as pretty unsympathetic most of the time. The beasts are even less sympathetic.
See, vampires have a tragic monstrosity about them because they're pale reflections of what they were in life. that slowly lose that part as they get older.
Also, vampires are usually not chosen. You don't choose that lifestyle. Well, with a beast, it's much more unclear, but there was at least a decent portion of beasts that willingly chose.
Oh no, all of them are fucking chosen.
Yeah.
You have to let the beast eat. You have to let the dream monster eat you to become it. You choose that.
Sort of do, sort of don't. Beast tries to have its cake and eat it too because it wants to be both.
Because of the bad writing. Because of the bad writing, originally they were more tragic, and it was because they were essentially accursed bloodlines, and you see that with the Otodo.
But then the weird otherkin elements came into it and made it problematic.
Well, what happened was they wanted to rewrite it.
It doesn't work. Basically, like, okay, so I get wanting to have the idea of like you're different and weird, and you can't.
The disgusting sexual predator that wrote that book basically changed his mind after the Kickstarter, because the Kickstarter very quickly
got feedback.
Well, the feedback was actually, I think it was you loved or hated it, because the biggest complaint was that you were born into that. It was the joke of it being otherkin, otherkin, don't kink shame me.
Yeah, a little bit of like this kind of makes like I understand this. I'm getting a lot of metaphors for people of like like gay, trans. Lifestyle.
But that's the thing. I think it would have been stronger if they kept that.
That's the weird thing, is it's like they wanted to again, as I said, they wanted to have their cake and eat it too with Beast.
Also, there's nothing sympathetic if you choose to be a monster.
No, I will say that there is something sympathetic if you choose to be a monster, like with Sin Eaters. Sin Eaters have to choose.
It's arguable how much Sin Eaters
described as awful.
They're not monsters. Sin Eaters, let's put it this way, unlike a vampire who is literally a leech on humanity, a Sin Eater doesn't need
to screw people over.
They're Geist. Maybe they're Geist. Maybe their Geist just wants to live a life of debauchery and they want to live through them. That doesn't require them go off to be a serial killer.
Basically, Geists don't hurt other people. Werewolves actually, they're pretty monstrous, but they do serve a good duty alongside their bad.
Yeah, because like they can flip out.
Prometheans can't help.
They literally
Prometheans are the better analog, honestly, because you don't choose to become a Promethean. You're made a Promethean. You're born, and your objective is to become human. Now that could be also a.
That's ultimately
and changelings are always victims.
Oh yeah, changelings are always victims.
Changeling's the other good analogy for like, I didn't choose this. I'm a sympathetic monster because of that.
Here's the thing. I was going to because Beast is being replaced with Deviant effectively. Yeah. Deviant does that perfectly because it does have the cake and eat it, but it's not seen in a hypocritical way. Because ultimately, there are those who are forced into it. Like, there's 4 different ways you can become and this is actually the way they describe you. There's the volunteer, the one who willingly did it or the self-experimenter. Those are the 2 willing types. Then there's the didn't quite know what they were getting into. They agreed to it, but they didn't quite know. And the ones they were completely unwilling. But at the end of the day, this, whether you agreed or not, once you get hit with it, it's not a good thing. In Beast, they embrace and fucking love their awfulness.
Beast try to justify.
In Deviant, it's strongly written, and despite my issues with the book, because it has some of the worst fluff I've ever read, they go way into many details about the conspiracies. But they're broken. They are psychologically and spiritually broken, and you actually can strongly see that they are constantly in pain.
And it's mechanically reflected too, which I think is one of the best strengths of Deviant.
Because you slowly degenerate, and you have to essentially uphold this combination of seeking vengeance, but trying to find peace too, and justice. Like, you have to find something to keep you together.
Yeah. Also, now, back to this. So you're calling this good. I'm calling this good. What's your opinion, Greg?
I'm honest, I can't always remember the thing, but I put this in, if amazing is the tippity top, like it's a 10 out of 10, I'd give this a 9, actually.
I usually rate amazing works between 10 and 9, which is why you'll see me rate that more often. Good is anything between 8 to 6 for me.
This is like an 8.5. Like, it's not quite amazing. Like, it doesn't have that really standout element with it, like the Thief Fish. from Beneath the Skin, which is just that elevates the entire thing.
I think the biggest issue is it could have used another 5 pages to go into a little more detail.
True.
I rate this as like this because unlike some of the other books, the mechanics of at least a lot of the conspiracies, in particular the merchants and the onis, those are applicable to other future settings outside of this, even in modern nights.
Oh yeah,
so I feel like having this, unlike the others, where say if you had the Raven and Wolf thing, where it adds nothing if you play in modern day England, this does add if you want to play in modern day Japan, or even maybe in a Japanese influenced area.
Or and for that matter,
Tudor Rose had that with the caravan, by the way.
Yeah, Tudor Rose also had things for a historical game, but they had a little bit like the extra chord ideas for if you wanted to play a changeling,
or if you wanted to revive the caravan group.
Yeah,
that's why I'm going to give this a 9, because I'll always rate something that has mechanics that can be applicable outside of its own setting as higher, because you are better off for having read this.
I remember now why I rated this only good. Everything is easy to understand and read, and it gives you good mechanics, but they actually don't give the variety. They assume you're going to come up with the hooks yourself, and I love that, but for starting DMs, it's always good to have a couple of...
It's always good to have at least a couple suggestions in there. Like, I think that...
if they added that, it would become amazing.
I think Beneath the Skin and Three Kingdoms and After the Fall all have very good ways of getting you into that.
Basically, it's missing that part, and the same can be said for Beneath the Skin because it's a little clunkier. This one is probably the most newbie-friendly, other than for the DM. The DM would have to come up with adventures. And admittedly, it's just something it could be just something as simple as you just steal the plot of fucking Inuyasha. Some asshole bandit demon, like an actual demon who serves as a brigand, fucks you over, and your group is trying to get revenge on him.
Or 47 Samurai, except instead of an asshole official, it was an asshole monster.
Yeah, like an awful samurai proto yakuza, like vampire yakuza, man.
Or if you want to be more like your lord or your merchant lord gets taken out by his rival, who is a vampire, and your characters are the Ronin and other people that worked under him.
From Samurai Champloo. You only know him as he who smells of sunflowers.
They actually recommend...
Your team has been killed. Each of your team had someone get fucked by this guy.
Yeah, they actually recommend for the media you read is Samurai Champloo.
Because it's perfect, because you each can have a different reason. Like in this case, an artist who was stiffed by them. Like they gave a woodwork that he just lost. The samurai, the man killed his lord in a duel, so he's now a Ronin. For the farmer, this man basically impersonated a taxman. Merchant was swindled out of a deal, and y'all team together to fuck this guy who smells of sunflowers. Like, you want to fuck him over, but then as you start studying him, that's not a normal guy. He's a wait, what? And then you find out he's like a changeling or something.
Yeah, there's a lot of things. Again, this one just requires a little bit more from the GM, which,
and that's
again,
I think only reason I can't give it amazing. If they had one or two hooks, like adventure hook ideas, it would become amazing.
Yeah, it's one of the best ones in the book.
It is the nicest written.
It is definitely that.
I'm gonna stick to my guns on this, but because I'm not just and I'll agree as a full on thing, this would be better. As a setting / mechanics books, I still think I'm rating that most of
it is my second favorite aside from Constantinople, which I think is the only one I still have as amazing besides Three Kingdoms.
Yeah, Three Kingdoms is just fun.
Well, that's because it's Chinese culture, but in terms of everything, After the Fall has the most, as all of it, which is why it's better. But this is the friendliest.
Got 3 new comments. Let's break them down before we go.
Yep.
They broke it down enough. You could run a game if you were really interested in playing in only feudal Japan. Chances are you probably know a lot of yokai in that case. In my opinion, I'd actually like to play in the Bakumatsu
just steal the plot of Kurosawa movies. That's also very true.
Yeah.
I personally want to play in the Bakumatsu, but that's because I'm a fucking nerd. But also, I want the weird. I like the weird fusion of an anachronistic and anachronistic medieval kind of elements and modern stuff. So, and this book has a very comedy easy campaign. Is just due to how weird Japanese mythology is.
One of the best characters you can tote into an Edo period game is a kabuki actor because they play comedy to a T.
Mm-hmm.
They're very fun.
Thank you. I just want to say I want to say something. I want to personally thank the audience for showing up. This is actually one of I think our more active streams in a little bit. So thanks.
Yes.
It was nice.
Yeah, thank you for all showing up.
It was nice. It was nice seeing you guys. I'm actually really happy when chat started living up.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. It's always good to have you here because it does give us a lot of feedback and extra things to look at.
And with that in mind, we're going to sign off. I do have a Discord link in the description. Apparently what?
And apparently people are using it, so thanks everyone.
It's nice for you guys to do that. Next week we will actually continue the Weeb streak. We will cover House Kurita, which is a BattleTech book. So with that in mind, have a good night, everyone. Thanks for rocking with us for a little over 3 hours.